real time using a link that was shared via various channels prior to the meeting. I would like to therefore extend a welcome to all who may be observing the meeting today. A copy of the video of the meeting will also be available following the meeting on our website for anyone who wishes to view it. In relation to today's proceedings, I would like to note the following. For those observing, firstly, various of the reports being received today have previously been scrutinised by the board's committees in the weeks leading up to the board meeting. An example of this would be the integrated performance report, with relevant aspects of that report being scrutinised at CTM's Quality and Safety Committee and CTM's Planning, Performance and Finance Committee. The scrutiny afforded by the board committees is set out in highlight reports prepared for each board meeting, which are listed under our consent agenda items. Secondly, you may notice that the board members and other presenters may not always be looking at the camera. This is due to colleagues needing to reference their board papers throughout the meeting. And thirdly, we'd be taking a short break during the meeting after about an hour, around 11 o'clock, and possibly again at 12 o'clock, depending on the timings. For board members, firstly, questions on the consent agenda items have been sought in advance of the meeting. Secondly, as referenced earlier in my introduction, where it is evident reports have received significant scrutiny at board committees, the board will take this into account when receiving this item and therefore the amount of time focused upon it. Thirdly, as part of the steps we take to continually improve the work of the board, at the end of today's meeting, I will be asking colleagues how you think we have done. There are some question prompts set out in this regard at the end of the agenda. I encourage all board members to keep this in mind and offer reflections and suggestions in this regard. All board committee chairs have adopted the same approach after each committee meeting. For presenters, when introducing a report or giving a presentation, presenters need to take into account that board members will have read the report in advance of the meeting, and hence the board will only need to be made aware of any issues that may have changed since the report was drafted. I would like to welcome Anne Morris, our new Associate Independent Board Member, to her first meeting of the board. Anne is the new chair of the board Stakeholder Reference Group and is therefore an Associate Board Member. Bryony Tweedale, Consultant Midwife, to the meeting. Bryony is here to present the patient story item at agenda item 2.1. Melanie Barker, Assistant Director of Therapies and Health Sciences, who is attending the meeting on behalf of Lauren Edwards, our Director of Therapies and Health Sciences, who has tendered her apologies. Michelle Hurley-Tyers, Assistant Director of Employee Experience and Wellbeing, who was attending the meeting on behalf of Howell Daniel, who has tendered his apologies. And Anna Llewellyn, the Gender Integrated Locality Group Nurse Director, to the meeting, who is attending to present on agenda item 6.4, a Teeth Lydiard Improvement Plan. On to item 1.2, apologies for absence. We've had apologies from Linda Thomas, Independent Member, Lauren Edwards, Executive Director of Therapies and Health Science, Howell Daniel, Executive Director for People, and Callie Hambling, Assistant Director of Governance and Risk. 1.3, in relation to declarations of risk. We have not been notified of any declarations of risk prior to the meeting. Has anyone anything they wish to declare at this point? Wendy, has anyone noted any conflicts that they wish to declare?
No, Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to go on to item 2.1, which is the patient story. I'm pleased to invite Bryony Tweedale, Consultant Midwife, to present today's patient story, which relates to maternity services. I invite Bryony to say a few words before a video is shared of a patient who is sharing their experience of giving birth at the Tyrion Birthing Centre. Bryony.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you for inviting the opportunity to present today's patient story. It includes a lovely introduction, so I'll move on to Dan to share that story with us.
Seems we have some technical problems at the moment, but our IT colleagues are looking to remedy the situation.
Marissa, I wonder if you want to move on to the consent agenda and deal with that, and then perhaps come back to the patient story.
Okay. If I could then go on to the consent agenda, and we'll come back to the patient story. To ensure we focus on business critical activity and discussions, we continue to use the consent agenda for this meeting. I'd like to remind everyone that highlight reports from board committees are routinely included on the consent agenda for formal noting and are placed on the main agenda for discussion. Only when there are specific areas identified in the report for escalation to the board. I would also like to remind colleagues that many of the items on both the consent and main agenda have already received significant scrutiny by our board committees prior to being put before the board today. It is important to note, therefore, that the level of discussion and debate at the meeting today is not a representation of the totality of time and consideration undertaken in relation to these issues on behalf of the board under the board's scheme of delegation to committees. Given colleagues will have had the opportunity to read all the items placed under the consent agenda in advance of this meeting, are there any issues that anyone wishes to move to the main agenda for discussion? Wendy, can you please confirm if there are any colleagues raising any questions or any objections raised to any items on the consent agenda?
None raised, Chair.
Can I just check before I move on to item 4.1? Are we in a place to share the patient story, please?
We're attempting to try again. Apologies, Chair. Looks like we're still having some technical difficulties.
Okay then, I will move on then to item 4.1, please. Are there any matters arising not considered on the action log? The matters arising. Can I then move on to 5.1, please, which is the Chief Executive's report. I invite Paul to highlight the main items from this report, which is for noting.
Thank you, Chair, and morning, everybody. Just to update on a few areas that are in my report. Just wanted to mention an event that happened a few weeks ago at the end of May, where Dom, myself and Howell were fortunate enough to attend the SAS Doctors and Dentists Conference. And many colleagues will know that the specialist doctors, associate specialist doctors, are a really key workforce within our organisation and provide a great deal of service work for patients across all the specialties, medical specialties, surgical specialties, mental health, many other areas. And it was a really great opportunity to listen to the SAS doctors, hearing about the contribution they make within the organisation, but also some of the innovation and improvement work that they've all been leading. I think it's also fair to say that this is a group of doctors that probably are feeling perhaps that the contribution they provide clinically isn't as recognised as it could be in the organisation, and it was really useful to have the feedback from them about how they see their role developing in the future. I know Dom has taken away a number of actions to look at how we can bring that group of doctors much more into some of the discussions about the future development of services across CTM, and also thinking about how we really capitalise on the knowledge and expertise that they bring. But I think it was a really good opportunity to have that forum to discuss their particular contribution they make, but also to talk about how they want to be further involved. So more will probably follow in future meetings to give feedback on that topic, but a really good opportunity to listen to them at that event. We're going to come on and talk about later about the pressures. Just to say, as you all know, we are still seeing high rates of COVID across our communities, and that's leading to high rates of transmission, and then also high rates of transmission within the hospital. There is extreme pressure across all of the hospitals at the moment, linked in part to the COVID challenges, which is playing through into staffing issues within our wards and service areas, but also down to some of the high demand pressures we're seeing in terms of attendances in the emergency department. Gethin will come on and talk about later on some of the work we're doing around the 6 goals, but I think we just need to acknowledge that we are dealing with a pretty challenging situation at the moment across the health board. Finally, just also wanted to say that we are really proud that we are the first, Prince Charles Hospital is the first hospital in Wales to launch a partnership with the pregnancy loss charity Cradle. Cradle provide a huge amount of support to women who suffered pregnancy loss or termination, and have provided a whole range of comfort bags for women who are admitted to hospital for unexpected or overnight stays. They were really pleased that we wanted to work in partnership with them. We started the work with them in Prince Charles Hospital, and that will be spread over to Princess of Wales Hospital shortly. And I was really glad to go along with Suzanne, our Director of Midwifery, and some other colleagues from the development project at Prince Charles, because this introduction to Cradle has been made with our construction contractor Tilbury Douglas, and it's been really great that Tilbury Douglas have supported the relationship with Cradle that's developed, and I think there's a huge opportunity for us to build on that, and particularly in light of the real focus we've had on improvement around maternity and neonatal services. I think it's a really another positive thing to add to our offering, if you like, for our local women, particularly at these really challenging times. Those are all the key points, Chair, in my report, but happy obviously to take any questions if anyone has them.
Thank you, Paul. I invite members to raise any questions. Do any of the board members have any questions for Paul, please? Well, thanks to Paul for his report. Unless there are any objections, I suggest the board resolves to note the report. Wendy, can you please confirm if there are any remaining questions or any objections raised, please?
None, Chair.
I then go on to item 5.2, please, which is the board assurance framework. I invite Georgina Gadley to present the BAF update report, which was received and approved by the Executive Leadership Group on the 25th of July 2022 and is before the board for approval. George.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So pleased to present the board assurance report. It's the second time that the board has received a populated assurance report. You'll note from the report it's undergone quite a significant review with executive colleagues, with amendments highlighted in red in the report. I'd particularly like to draw your attention to the risk score changes. So strategic risk number 9, fulfilling our environmental and social duties and ambitions, that's been reduced from a 16 to 12. Strategic risk number 8, the culture, values and behaviours, again has been reduced from 16 to 12. And we've reviewed the risk articulation for strategic risk number 6. The Director of Digital has articulated that risk and undergone significant review in terms of how the risk is described. We've now got a very robust cycle of review embedded within the corporate governance team that ensures that the BAF remains a dynamic document. But bearing in mind they are strategic risks, it's unlikely that you'll see significant movement over time, but just to be reassured that they are very regularly reviewed in advance of coming to board. The key risks I've highlighted, but if there's anything else that anybody wishes to raise a comment on or a query, I'll ask my executive colleagues to come in as the strategic risk owners to update on any issues that anybody has, but I put it to the board for you to receive and take assurance from. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Georgina. I invite board members to raise any questions.
Patsy wishes to raise a comment.
Patsy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Georgina. Just to make a comment on the consequences of the risks, they appear to change an awful lot, but if the risk has a consequence of 4, it's the probability of that risk that's likely to change rather than the consequence, other than in special circumstances. It was good to see the rewording and reworking completely of the digital risk, and that for me is an example of where the consequence of risk may change, because the risk itself has been completely reworded and rethought out. So it's a comment rather than a question, but thank you, Chair.
We also have a comment from Ian Wells.
Ian.
Yeah, thanks. Patsy just said exactly what I was going to say. I think it's really clear in the way that the digital has been reworded and reworked. I think it's a lot clearer now what the gaps that we have are and what the mitigating actions that are being taken. So I really wanted to pay tribute to the work that's been done in that area. But overall, I think the maturity of this whole process is really paying dividends now. We're starting to see this coming through a far more mature way than we did previously. And it's a lot easier to navigate through the documentation. So congratulations to everyone involved in putting this together.
No further comments.
Thank you for that, Ian. Are there any further comments, Wendy?
Georgina just wishes to come back in, Chair.
Okay. Georgina?
Thank you, Chair. I just also wanted to say that I know we've agreed not to receive the organisational risk register any longer in light of this, so wanted to thank Ian for his comments. But just as extra assurance, on our admin control system, we have uploaded the organisational risk register for anybody who wishes to see the connectivity between that and the board assurance framework and the risks that are reflected in the board assurance framework that relate to the operational risks as well. So that's there for additional assurance.
Thank you, Georgina. Can I confirm, Wendy, are there any other comments, please?
Yes, Mel J, who has a comment.
Okay. Mel.
Thank you, Chair. George, if I could just comment, because this is an observation from me, it's in relation to risk number 5. It's about community and partner engagement. And I know from a personal level, I know the great work that's going on. And I'm sure that before very long, when we review that could very well go down to a lesser risk and possibly amber, because I think the board and everybody involved has done a lot of work with our partners, with our communities, and I'm sure we all know what we've done in the last 18 months, 2 years, but I'm sure that's heading in the right direction. I just wanted to make that comment now, just in case anybody looking at it think it's a red risk. We're really moving in the right direction on that one.
Thank you for your comments, Mel. Can I just confirm with Wendy, are there any further comments or questions, please?
No further comments listed, Chair.
Okay. Thanks to Georgina for the report. Unless there are any objections, I suggest the board resolves to approve the board assurance framework. Wendy, can you please confirm if there are any remaining questions or any objections raised, please? None, Chair. Thank you. Can I go on to item 5.3, please, which is the Digital and Data Committee Highlight Report. And I invite Ian Wells, Chair of the Digital and Data Committee, to present the report, which is before the board for noting, to focus on the area for escalation to the board. Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Emrys. The reason this one is here and not in the consent agenda is we wanted to make the board aware of a particular item that has gone up to a higher level of risk since this original report was written. I'll point out to the highlight report where it talks about in the red section, the alert escalate, the extremely fragile position in relation to information governance. That was organisational risk 4699. And this fragile position was due to the resignation of the current head of information governance. The team has been looking at ways of mitigating that in the interim, and they're looking at maybe opportunities through the new operating model change to try and plug the gap as far as that's concerned. But that was the original risk, but it has escalated since then. So I did want to make everyone aware that we've had a further situation since then, and that is where we've had a further member of staff leaving, but we are actually trying now to mitigate that. There's a number of actions that are being taken in order to do that, which I'll just make everyone aware of. The risks have been increased to a 5, almost certain in terms of the likelihood of the head of IG and IG officer roles. So that's gone up in that area. and George and Stuart as the exec leads are escalating this to the executive leadership team, and so this is being treated on an urgent basis. So work is taking place to try and plug the gap as far as this is concerned, and we have had the head of IG post out for advert. Okay, so just making the board aware of those issues.
Thank you, Ian. I invite board members to raise any questions.
Georgina has a comment.
Georgina?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Ian. This has obviously been a big focus for the Digital and Data Committee, and it's been on the Organisational Risk Register for a long while. Just want to give an update, if I may. I will also invite Stuart in to follow up on next steps, because the portfolio changes for leading on information governance moved from myself to Stuart on Monday. So we're sort of working on this together for now. But we did advertise the role of Head of Information Governance. We did have applications and we did interview. Unfortunately, that appointment didn't follow. We did appoint or offer an appointment, but it didn't follow through. So we're in a position now where we're having to reevaluate that and working with Stuart, as I say, to look at the sort of short-term mitigation for that risk and obviously the longer term plan. So I'll hand over to Stuart to fill you in, if that's okay, on those.
Thank you, Georgina. Stuart.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ian, thank you, George. So as comments have been made, we're obviously in a tricky position at the moment. That said, as Ian alluded to right at the outset, actually, we're considering our structure within the digital function and how we develop a compliance function that really supports the digital agenda going forward, and as such, the information governance element of that will be moved into the digital team. In terms of the short term, as George has alluded to, we did try to appoint and we did offer, but unfortunately that candidate didn't accept. So we are now reviewing the job description to make sure that we get a broader pool to attract into the organisation, and that will be going out again within the next week or two. For re-advertising. In addition to that, we're identifying, and as Ian alluded to, there is another person who's leaving the team. We are now going to replace that person and add an additional post into our function by reusing resources that we've got in other parts of the digital establishment. So we've got some plans that are going to take place over the next couple of weeks, which will get us into a better place for the autumn. In the immediate term, I'm also working with Digital Health and Care Wales to provide some additional support to us on a short-term basis to cover any IG gaps. Clearly, myself and others within the digital team will also supplement that gap that we have at the moment. So we've got a number of mitigations. We've got a longer term plan which we hope to come to fruition, as I say, in the autumn. But yeah, welcome comments.
Wendy, can you confirm if there are any other comments, please?
No other comments received, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks to Ian for the report. Unless there are any objections, I suggest that the board resolves to note this report. I'm conscious at the beginning of the meeting we had some technical difficulties in respect of item 2.1. I understand those technical difficulties have been resolved. Can I then move back to item 2.1, please, which is the patient story, and invite Bryony Tweedale, consultant midwife, into the meeting, please. Brian?
Thank you, Chair. This is our patient story of Alex, a service user of our birth centre at Royal Glamorgan Hospital.
Seems we still have some technical difficulties. Can we just confirm if we're able to run this agenda item, please? Okay, it seems we're still having problems with the technical difficulties. We'll see if we can raise it again at the agenda later on in the agenda. If I could then go on to item 6, please, which is delivering our recovery improvement plans. I invite Gethin Hughes to share the presentation with members, which is before the board for noting on improving urgent care. Gethin.
Thank you, Chair, and happy to take members through the presentation. Will the presentation be being shown, or are we?
The presentation to go on the screen, is there, Gethin?
Yes, Daniel should be sharing the presentation, Emrys.
Okay.
Whilst the presentation's coming up, I'll just remind members of the principles of the Six Goals programme. And the Six Goals programme is about is really focused on addressing the challenges of urgent care. And we know that we have many patients who attend our hospitals who we can manage in a different way, but equally also recognise that there are patients, when patients do attend our hospitals, we can manage them through our hospitals on alternative pathways, which either can reduce the amount of time they need to spend in hospital, or even negate the need to stay with us at all. So the Six Goals programme can sort of be broken down into three key areas. The first is ensuring that patients can access the urgent care that they require in alternative environments. So and that they don't need necessarily to attend an A&E department for that. In addition, as I say, when we know that patients do attend the hospital, we can treat them on different pathways, on what we would call ambulatory pathways, that mean they can be treated in clinic, or that they can be treated in our in assessment units without necessarily needing to be admitted to the hospital. And then the third key focus for us is around when patients are in hospital, is ensuring that once they are medically optimised to go home, that we can do that in a prompt and swift manner, because we know that being in hospital, if you don't need to be there, is not the best place for patients, particularly in getting them back to a level of independent function. And that's particularly pertinent for our older population, which make up the largest proportion of our inpatients. So if I could ask to move to slide 4, please. So this slide, whilst it's very busy, I think it gives and I think then underpins the sort of the scale and challenge of the programme of work that we're looking to undertake. So the first area that we're really focused on in terms of the delivery of the Six Goals within the Health Board is around alternatives to hospital attendance and admission. And the first thing that we are focused very much on is building upon the bedrock of excellent work that's been done around the population stratification. So we've now got really good data that supports us to identify which patients are going to become at greatest risk of needing urgent support over the course of the next 12 months. And working with our community teams and using the virtual wards and supporting with our crisis teams, enhancing the support that we can give to those patients to help them stay well and to be supported at home. The second key element for us, which links to goal 2, is then for those patients that do require urgent support, that we can do that at a single point of access. So it's really, really difficult, both for patients, carers, and at times different services to know how best to access our services to avoid a hospital attendance. And part of the work that we wish to deliver through this programme is a true single point of access to the services within the Health Board. that will allow us to wrap around the right support and the right care to our population when they need it, and if they do require hospital admission, that we can do that in a far more streamlined approach than currently our population experiences. And the third key element to that focus of work is providing an alternative location out with the A&E departments for patients who have minor illness or minor injuries. And we have minor injury units in 2 of our community hospitals. We have our expanding urgent primary care centres, and part of our strategy is how we bring those together to provide a genuine alternative for patients to have to attend the A&E departments, where they spend sadly for many experience a long wait to be seen. And that actually what we want to do is make that a booked service to allow people to be seen in a timely way, and that we can progress their diagnosis and treatment through that way. So that becomes the sort of that first key work stream. The second bit is then when patients do need to come to our hospitals as emergencies. At the moment, many of them just have, there is one point through the hospital, which is the A&E department. And as Paul has already picked up in his CEO report, we have some significant pressures there, but with the volume of patients who are attending, the volume of patients who are waiting onward transfer to beds, and the impact that then has on our ambulance handover delays and the waiting times that patients experience. Yet we know that there are a cohort of patients that come into our A&E departments that can be seen either by specialty teams directly, or could even be managed through urgent outpatient appointments, rapid access diagnostics, and managed in a better way that doesn't require them to stay in the A&E departments, and that we can keep our A&E departments free for those patients who are genuinely sick, need that rapid assessment within that facility, and for onward treatment within the hospital. So we have got some pockets of really good ambulatory services across our 3 sites, and the key focus here is how we bring those together. So we have a really strong ambulatory surgical service within the Princess of Wales Hospital, and we're seeking how we replicate that at both Prince Charles and the Royal Glamorgan. At the Royal Glamorgan Hospital, we've got a good acute medical service, and again that provides a really strong alternative for both the GP referred patients, but also we can move patients from the A&E department round there if they are medically stable. So it is about replicating that again across how we bring mental health crisis response into that, because many patients will attend our A&E departments for that support, but also then for those patients that don't need to be admitted but have what we would describe as a social care crisis, can then be discharged home with the right support, and get back to their own bed, because as I said earlier, actually being in your own bed, unless you need to be in hospital, is the best place for patients to be. The third area of focus is around then how we manage patients once they're in our hospitals, and as you'll see, there's a number of actions there. We know that patients are staying longer with us at the moment than they were pre-COVID. And we know that there are opportunities for us to move, to manage patients in a safe but quicker way through our hospitals. We also know that our discharge profile each day is too late in the day. So we don't discharge our patients early enough in the day to mean that we can move our patients that are in A&E up to the wards earlier in the day, which is great for them, because of course they see their specialty teams much earlier in the day and start their treatments in a faster way. But equally, it means that we're able to clear the A&E departments earlier and reduce the likelihood of holding ambulances because we've got crowded departments. We also know that there are some specific pathways, and through the performance report, members will note our disappointing performance on stroke, and actually being able to manage stroke admissions direct to our stroke units is a really important quality metric, and working in this way allows us to manage those patients in a better way, where direct specialty assessment is really important. The final sort of core work stream then relates to integrated discharge, and we're working exceptionally closely with our colleagues in the 3 local authorities within the Health Board to ensure that once we've identified a patient is fit to go, that they can be discharged for their onward assessment at home, or in an interim placement whilst we work on their longer term solutions, rather than waiting in an acute hospital bed. We have a real challenge, I think, and members will be aware of this, of moving patients out at the moment in a timely way, and one of it remains a real pressure for us on our sites, and we have got quite significant variation across our hospital sites in terms of the percentage of beds lost to patients waiting for packages of care to start, or nursing home placements. And so we've got some really good work going on. A lot of this is being led by our colleagues in the local authority to help set this up. We've got some really good examples of work happening at the Royal Glamorgan of the integrated hub. We're bringing on stream with work with both with all the local authorities' additional capacity, and again, all of that will begin to have a material impact. So what we've got set out there on this slide is then the indicative milestones for the programme delivery, and you'll see that many of the actions that we've got in place are about an implementation during the autumn, with many of these services then becoming live and our standard way of working in preparation for Q4 and the key pressures of winter, but very much trying to ensure that those patients that do need those patients that don't need to come to hospital, we can provide a genuinely high quality alternative to them, but for those that do need to come in to our hospitals, we can manage in a really effective way. I'm very conscious I've done an earlier presentation on this, Chair, to members, and very happy to take questions, but I'll finish the presentation there.
Thank you, Gethin. I invite board members to raise any questions.
None raised, Chair. Oh, yes, we have one from Mel and Nicola.
Okay, if I could invite Mel in then, please.
Thank you, Chair. Borodagi, I think thank you very much for that. Gethin, could we if you could just talk us through what are we actually doing in relation to the high intensity frequent attenders? Because I noticed there's a plan action, and it looks, from what I can see, that we're looking to sort of complete or be in a better pace around about the tail end of September. But if I was a just an ordinary community member, which I am, looking at this, could you just break it down as to how do we define a high intensity frequent attender coming into the hospital, and what are we actually going to do to reduce the admissions of, I'm presuming this is the intent, the high intensity frequent attenders? Are you comfortable to answer that?
Yeah, by all means, Mel. And I think there's several bits to that. So we know that patients often attend A&E on a frequent basis for a variety of reasons. So the first piece of work we're undertaking at the moment is getting those lists, understanding those patients, and then understanding what it is that we need to do differently for those patients. Now, for some of those patients, it's about providing them with psychological support, because actually what they've got is an ongoing challenge, an ongoing crisis, and that providing them with ongoing psychological support is the right thing. The second piece is also making sure that we, if it's about a different arrangement we need to put in place with general practice, we're having those conversations with GP colleagues, and again looking at what those solutions are. Equally, though, it's also about signposting to community support, and I think we recognise that sometimes an A&E attendance is manifesting because of difficulties in managing life and other things, and absolutely recognise that there's a whole infrastructure of community support organisations within our health board who can provide some of that support for patients to live well, and it's about trying to get under that level of what is the real cause of that individual's challenge. So it is about doing it on an individual patient basis. So it isn't about saying all patients will go through this route, but at the first moment is really getting under who those people are and understanding their stories, so that we can then begin to try and wrap around the right support to those patients.
Okay. In relation to the comments, can I just invite Dom Perfect, the Medical Director, who'd like to comment on the frequent attendance response, please?
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. Yeah, it's really just sort of to back up what Gethin's already saying, really. We do know that there are a number of initiatives out there for frequent attenders. It's first of all knowing who they are, and that's actually not as difficult to work out as it would seem. And actually, conversely, people to go and ask of the GPs, because they know who their frequent attenders are, because they attend the GP practices just as much as well. There are a number of specific initiatives in place, particularly for the alcohol liaison team, who have set up a process where they will phone every day the patients, and by doing that they can prove a significant reduction in the number of attendances into an A&E department. So it's utilising that sort of approach and how we do that across the board. Again, there is an element here with the GP practices being under significant pressure and strain as well, that people aren't getting their regular appointments there, so therefore they're more likely to attend, and that's much more likely to happen with frequent attenders than it is for anyone else in the general public. So it's a big piece of work, but there are a number of initiatives in place that we just need to ramp up, which is part of this process, as Gethin was saying, and we start targeting the specific problem underlying it, and then that should then help damp it down. So it is a significant problem. The GPs are aware of it. They know who those patients are, but we just need to be a bit more clever in the way we think and approach about it, which is part of the whole part of the 6 goals plan.
You're on mute, Mel. Okay, if I could go on to the next question, please, Nicola.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gethin. Gethin, my question is in relation to slide 4, where you talk about the 6 goals. And I count at the bottom there around 20 task and finish groups. I mean, we all know the challenges faced by the workforce and the demands they're up against. So my guess is a majority of those task and finish groups will include many of the same people. So my question is, as we know, task and finish groups have a tendency to drift. People don't attend and we never have an outcome. So how are you going to ensure that the task and finish groups are on target and that attendance is at the level it needs to be to make the decisions that are required?
Yeah, no, Nicola, it's a really fair challenge, and you know, but the other piece that I need to be clear about is all of these aren't running simultaneously, because it is that there's only so many hours in the day, aren't there, for us to do this and to do all the other things that people do on a day-by-day basis. Equally, though, it is about making sure that we've got they are very clear about what the task is, and so that they don't gain a life of their own. I think, you know, one of the things that we need to be really clear when we set up task and finish groups is that we're really clear about when we stand it down, and it is for a very finite period in order to get some of those happening. Equally, we've got but equally, what we've also done for that very reason is that we have amalgamated the ED, you know, for example, the ED task and finish group is part of the weekly joint ED meeting, so that we're really clear about the specific tasks that they are delivering through that. So we're not putting another meeting in the diary, but we are keeping that focused. It's something that we've got to guard against, Nicola, and we do have a clear sort of project reporting arrangement to ensure that they are delivering in line with their plans, but it's a live risk that we need to be conscious of.
Thank you, Gethin.
If I could invite Jim in, please.
Thank you, Chair. Gethin, following on from Dom's response and Nicola's question, in relation to slide 5, are there any other dependencies apart from our reliance on GPs to achieving the milestones that and the targets that are keeping you awake at night? There's a lot of activity required to be done here to achieve these objectives. What's keeping you awake at night?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's I think the big thing actually is workforce, and that's workforce in health, but it's also workforce in social care, because we know that our ability to respond to this for patients across the across our health board footprint is around workforce, and the workforce challenge is significant, and we'll pick that up as well as part of planned care, because equally we're you know, there's a lot of pressure on our staff as to respond to the planned care challenges, but equally what we're looking at is how do we what are our innovative workforce solutions, and how do we work together, how do we create meaningful roles, how are we, and we had this very conversation at the organisation's leadership forum on Tuesday, which is how do we begin to how do we bring new people that haven't thought about healthcare into the workforce, and looking at creating some of those career structures. So the reliance on general practice is clearly a key one. Reliance and working in partnership with our colleagues in the local authority is another. But the thing that keeps me awake at night most is having the workforce to deliver the services we need to.
Thank you, Chair.
I could then invite Jane in, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. It really is a synthesis of the multitude of interconnecting issues that need to be addressed in order for us to improve these services. I think you've already actually started to touch on what I was going to talk about, which is the need for partnership working with our local authorities, and in particular at the Population Health and Partnerships Subcommittee of the board this week, we received a market stability report which gave a really good account of exactly where we are in relation to supply of care home placements and indeed of workforce in care homes and domiciliary care, as well as a lot of other issues. I think it really brought home to members who are at that committee the amount of work that needs to be done with our partners in the local authorities to actually create change there. And could you just flesh out some of the plans that are emerging for that partnership working?
Yeah, but by all means, Jane, and I think the first thing to say is that the appetite for joint working between ourselves and the 3 LAs within the health board are really strong. So you know, the work that we're doing on a day-by-day basis is great. We've got really good engagement from Lisa, who, you know, I know is here today, but also from Paul and from Claire at RCT in Bridgend. And we're looking at, so we're doing some tactical things at the moment about bringing some additional capacity on board, both you know, some bedded capacity in both Merthyr and in RCT, and looking at bringing in additional domiciliary care capacity within Bridgend, because that's where we've got different pressures in different parts of the patch. And so we've got, you know, we're doing that tactical piece, trying to resolve some of those capacity constraints going into winter. I think the longer term piece, and I'm sure Linda will happily come in here, is then around how do we move to a far greater level of joint working and integration between our teams in health and within social care, because there is a significant crossover, and it, you know, having true single teams looking after populations is clearly where we all wish to get to in due course, and it's how we do that. But perhaps I'll hand over to Linda to answer a little bit more on that.
So I think you've covered the flavour of it. Thank you, Gethin. But to reassure the board, there are very focused streams of work, mostly under the governance of the RPB, to describe fully what we mean by an integrated health and social care system, organised at cluster level, working with GPs to best meet the needs of their local population. And that is also taking us into some joint ventures. We're meeting shortly to talk about where we might be going with joint management posts, pooled budgets, also developing a longer term approach to developing facilities which will house some of the services which will address some of those market management deficits. So just to summarise, that report that Jane refers to illustrated that we've in our system there are too many residential care beds which aren't really fit for modern use. People don't want them anymore, so they're empty. They're not necessarily staffed, but they are not being utilised, whereas we don't have enough care, nursing care for people with dementia, respite care and palliative care. These are the things that people need in order to manage better at home, as you know, with better outreach services into people's homes. So that work is ongoing, and will be I'll talk about the strategy a bit later on, but when we come back in September, we will be able to articulate a bit more fully what the shape of that is and the content.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Did you want to come back on that at all, Jane?
No, thank you. I look forward to hearing about the developments as they happen.
Thank you. Can I invite Paul Mears in, our Chief Executive, please?
Thanks, Emrys. I was just to a couple of points really to re-emphasise. I mean, I think as Linda and Gethin have both described, you know, clearly the joint working with local authorities is a really important part of this process. And I think whilst the 6 goals is very focused on sort of the emergency care pathway, we shouldn't forget that actually the biggest enabler to improving the emergency care pathway is to ensure patients flow effectively through the system. So I think that's a really good opportunity, I think, for us to really sort of develop the existing joint work with the local authorities. And as Linda and Gethin have both said, I've had some really positive conversations this week actually with the council chief execs about what more we could be doing to bring our frontline health and social care teams together in a more joined up way. The other point was just to make and getting touched on this a bit with the conversation about the most complex patients and frequent attender work. There is something about how we try and join up also with other things that are going on within Welsh Government and within the Health Board. So all the work that's currently underway around primary care cluster development, for example, and the development of multidisciplinary teams around clusters, that gives us a really great opportunity to join up cluster development work, integration of health and social care, developing streamlining some of our community service models to be more consistent, urgent care treatment centre developments that Gethin's described, access to mental health, emergency urgent care. All of these things are all being worked on, but I think what this structure gives us is the ability to try and bring all of those things together and ensure we don't end up with fragmentation, because actually if you're the patient or the member of the community and you don't know what to do, you want the easiest answer. And at the moment, frankly, the easiest thing to do is to phone 999, because if we're honest, the way we've constructed services has become quite complicated and complex for the individuals to understand. So we have to make the system as easy to access. So there's something about this, the single front door for non-urgent or non-999 care, and then behind that we need to make sure that the services are as joined up as possible, so that once people do access the point of contact, we know that we can get the right support to them as quickly as possible. And I should also say, of course, we are very aware that at the same time as we're having this meeting, colleagues from the Ambulance Trust will be having their board meeting talking about the pressures of the ambulance services under and the clinical risk that they are currently seeing increasing because of the delays in ambulance call-outs. So all of these things join together, and I think this is probably one of the most important programs of work we have on the books at the moment as an organisation, because we're very aware this is probably one of the biggest pressure points for our staff and for our community. So really encouraging to see the way it's being pulled together, and I think also come and talk about our structure later on, but the ability, the reorganisation of our structure to be much more themed in particular care groups, I think will also provide the right clinical and managerial leadership to ensure this programme is delivered.
Thank you, Paul. Can I invite Geraint Hopkins in, please?
Thank you. I think a lot of what I was going to say has been covered, so I won't waste your time. But I just think going back to those slides, which it looks a very complicated work stream. And if I think a member of the public was to sit here and make a comment, I think they just want to be assured that they're going to be able to get access to healthcare at the appropriate level when they need it. And so many of those things in the slides there are key to that. Working with the GPs, making sure that people can get appointments out in the community without needing to go to hospital. The importance of the minor injury unit, I felt was something worth commenting on in helping A&E. But I think a lot, and in terms of the local authority, just to encourage, and we've had conversations elsewhere about this, so I won't labour the point, that there is a real appetite for joint working with the local authorities. And I think a lot of work was done and is being done. I'm just concerned about the phrase "in due course," because it's been in due course for a long time, and I just hope that there's an impetus to push this agenda faster. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geraint. Did you want to come back in on that, Paul?
Yeah, sorry, my camera seems to stop working. Yeah, just to say and to reassure Geraint that we are absolutely committed to moving this forward. I think in the meeting I had this week with chief execs and the councils, there was a similar desire for pace in this agenda as well. So we are going to be working on bringing something forward, hopefully by September, that describes what we can do to actively bring together the frontline health and social care community-based team. So hopefully we'll be able to share that at the board meeting also with colleagues from the health board.
Thank you, Paul. I say thanks to Gethin for his report. Unless there are any objections, I suggest the board resolves to note this report Wendy, can you just please confirm if there are any remaining questions or any objections raised, please?
None, Chair.
Thank you, Wendy. Let's go on to the next item, please, which is 6.2 elective recovery. I invite Gethin Hughes to share the presentation with members, which is before the board for noting. Gethin.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take members through this presentation as well. And again, I'll just start with a little bit of context for our planned care recovery. So members will be aware that as part of the impact of COVID was the significant cessation of elective services, and as you'll see in some of the graphs in the presentation, we saw a massive growth in the number of patients waiting for treatment, and part of the recovery now from in the phase that we are now of living with COVID is how we now recover that backlog of patients and ensure that patients that require treatment receive it. And so we've got a number of pieces of work to address that, and that fits with the ministerial challenge that the minister has set, which is to see the number of patients waiting over 104 weeks or 2 years for treatment, for stage 4 treatment, will be addressed by the end of this financial year, and to ensure that patients don't wait more than 52 weeks or 1 year for a first outpatient appointment by the end of Q3 of this year. So we've got tens of thousands of patients waiting in those cohorts for treatment. So it is a very, very significant challenge, and there are a number of interventions that we are taking to support that, which I'll run through in the presentation. But I think it is really important to stress to the board that the size of the challenge we have is really quite significant, and the ability to deliver the ministerial ambition across all our specialties is a significant challenge for us. However, that said, getting our patients seen is a real priority for us, and I'll run through now some of those pieces. Just very briefly on the next slide, please, is the programme governance, and I've taken board through this previously. So we have an internal planned care recovery board that's actually meeting later on today. We had our meeting with Welsh Government in the joint executive team earlier this week. We have our monthly performance report review with Welsh Government next Monday. So there's a significant level of scrutiny both within the health board and of the health board by Welsh Government through this process. We have weekly performance meetings at a specialty level. We have improvement trajectories for each of those, and we're also engaged nationally with a range of programmes around orthopaedics, ENT, general surgery, outpatients, gynecology now, and others. But we've also got regional work going on across ophthalmology and endoscopy, and part of that has to be about using the planned care recovery monies that we as a health board received, which was 26.1 million, and making sure that we have those and how we use those both to support the clearance of our waiting list, but actually also to support us in terms of how we redesign the way in which our elective services operate, so that actually they become more resilient. The challenge we had pre-COVID as a health board is that we weren't able across all specialties to meet the waiting time targets at that point. So we're trying to redesign this on the back of a service that wasn't at that point able to deliver. Next slide, please. What you've got in here is just looking at where we're trying to get back to across a range of specialties to pre-COVID levels of activity, and you know, that's the first challenge for us as a health board, is to make sure that we're using all our existing capacity, all our funded capacity, as effectively as we can. And you'll see in a range of specialties we are now seeing the actual level of activity running either at the trajectory or in some specialties above it, which is really positive and is a is testament to the work that all our staff are doing over and above to get patients seen. And that overall what we are now seeing in terms of our total waiting list as a health board, as you'll see in the performance report, is that our waiting list position has stabilised, which is really positive, and that the total number of long waiters are coming down. The challenge for us at the moment is that we need to see the reduction accelerate in order to get closer to delivering the ministerial ambition. If you could move please through to slide, I think it's slide 7. Lovely, thank you. So that slide then sets out the where we're seeing the number of patients over 104 weeks start to come down. So we had our highest number of those patients in March. We have seen over the last few months probably around 1,500 patients now come off that waiting list, which whilst is really positive, as I say, we need to be seeing that rate accelerate in order to get the volume of patients down to a much lower position. So the next slide. And this and I think this really clearly starkly illustrates the number of the growth in the 52-week position, because as you can see, the number of patients waiting over 52 weeks between March 20 and March 21 is where the most significant growth occurred. Post that, we've seen that position, the rate of growth increase slightly, and with a second peak in the second peak of COVID at the end of 21-22. But that is is illustrating the challenge that we're experiencing. If we could go to the next slide, please. So there are some quite chunky pieces of work that we are doing over and above bringing on stream, first of all making sure that we're using all our existing capacity, how we're using the additional funds that we secured for capacity over and above that, and that we can then focus on then some bigger challenges around making our recovery sustainable in a range of areas. So the first is around diagnostics, and we've got a real pressure around our diagnostic capacity as a health board, and not just us, but our neighbouring health boards as well. So the first area that we've looked to focus is around improving our waiting time for endoscopy. This is a really key diagnostic for cancer patients, but also patients with benign but significant disease, and this is predominantly in gastroenterology. We have managed to secure a mobile endoscopy unit after some significant challenges, from ensuring that it was safe to sign off from a health regulations perspective. That unit is now fully signed off and is running, and that's on the Royal Glamorgan site. That's an extra over 100 patients a week having endoscopy. We continue to provide additional sessions at Prince Charles as well, and we are seeing the waiting time for suspected cancer patients now back down to around 2 weeks, which is the target that we were seeking, and bringing the routine waiting list back down also. In terms of other areas there around diagnostics, is about how do we work collaboratively with our colleagues in Cardiff and within AB, looking at what some of the more strategic solutions can be around around that diagnostic capacity, and where we can bring additional staff and facilities on stream is ongoing, and Paul might want to come in later on that as the CEO lead for diagnostics across the South East Wales area. But again, it's around making sure that we can stream the hot imaging requirements from the cold imaging requirements. So that again is an ongoing challenge. In terms of therapies, we recognise that there are many patients who are in our services that can be seen by other practitioners, and we've had some fantastic engagement from our therapy teams who have been working across a range of our specialties. So we've had the first contact physios working, supporting orthopaedics. We are seeing they're picking up patients that would historically have been referred to our orthopaedic department, and managing the vast majority of those out without needing to see an orthopaedic surgeon, which is really, really positive. Again, we're supporting the vascular service with our therapy teams. We've got urogynecology, so a lot of physiotherapy to support patients who are waiting to see a gynecologist, and again, those have proven to be exceptionally powerful. The challenge we've got now is ensuring that we have funding for those continuing post September, after the first year of funding they had. The other area is we made an investment into the WISE service that people will be aware of, and they are now the first point of access for patients who've been referred in with chronic pain. So recognising that many patients who have chronic pain, the most significant intervention we can provide them with is how to live well with their pain, because actually it isn't something that we can necessarily remove. And so it is, you know, the therapists are doing a significant piece of work to support us. The third area of significant focus is orthopaedics. So one of our, as is the case nationally, across the whole UK, orthopaedics is one area which has been most significantly impacted. And we're working on a phased approach to create ring-fenced orthopaedic capacity at the Royal Glamorgan site. And so phase one of that will be for RTE and Merthyr Cynnon patients to have their inpatient surgery, and we're giving an update to the national Get It Right First Time team today, but that is progressing really, really well, with the aim to have 2 dedicated orthopaedic theatres with beds on the Royal Glamorgan site on track to be this summer. And that will allow us then to ensure that we keep that service running. And what we will then seek to do as part of that longer term plan is how we grow that at the Royal Glamorgan, as part of our overall efficiency around our orthopaedic programme. So by bringing the inpatient joint surgery onto the Royal Glamorgan site, we'll be expanding the range and services of the day case surgery in orthopaedics that we provide at Prince Charles and Princess of Wales as part of that model. So that it ensures that we're treating the right patient in the right location. The final big focus area is ophthalmology, and again another service that has nationally been significantly impacted by COVID. And there's been a real opportunity there to change the way in which we provide our ophthalmic services, and working very much with the whole community, the whole community MDT for that. So we've now got a lot of ongoing work with our optometrists within the health board, who are providing services for shared care for glaucoma. We're rolling that out now for wet age-related macular degeneration, for diabetic retinopathy. We've got some further innovation happening within our own Optom service as well. We've managed to secure an additional glaucoma consultant who starts in October. We're interviewing again this month for a further appointment. So we're expanding our ophthalmic service. And again, it's how do we begin to create a centre of excellence for ophthalmics, certainly for the southern half of the health board, using the eye unit at Bridgend, so that we can make sure that we've got high volume, low complexity lists really supporting and reducing the backlog of patients waiting surgery. Next slide, please. So again, you as a board, you've seen this slide previously. So this is around some of those internal productivity increases which I've touched on. It is around how we change our efficiency through validation, but also the pooling of lists. So one of the challenges that we've had historically is we've run separate waiting lists on our 3 sites, and so different specialties have got differential weights. So for example, with orthopedics, the waiting list, the waiting time for a first outpatient appointment is much lower in Bridgend than it is in Merthyr. So we're offering patients appointments in Bridgend for them to be seen more quickly, but bringing those areas down. The final piece is around outpatients and for example, follow-ups not booked. So these are patients who are on long-term follow-up. What we are really working with there is moving to what we call patient-initiated follow-ups, and many of our patients are probably expert in their own illness far better than we are, and at the moment we give them an appointment once a year where they come. They might spend 5 minutes in the consulting room, and at that point they are well, their condition is well controlled. But then if they have an exacerbation of their condition, then it's really difficult to get them an urgent appointment to be seen. So what we want to do is move away from just having lots and lots of stock follow-ups already booked to moving to a patient-initiated follow-up model where patients will contact us if they need to be seen. And we will have the capacity then to bring them in a much more timely way. And that will be on a range of long-term condition areas. So we're up to about 20% now of PIFU, patient-initiated follow-up for gynecology, and we're aiming to get that up to around 25% in a number of our specialties. So some really good progress there. Next slide, please. And then the key risks, and again, so it is around the digital join up, and how we do that at the moment. It is a very admin heavy process. We continue, as we've discussed, the emergency pressures, pathology service and the vulnerability, the longer term vulnerability of that. We have made a significant investment in pathology this year. We're looking at how we can make that more sustainable going forward. Workforce remains a real challenge. And we're working with some insourcing companies and other areas to try and get capacity in so that we can open up all our physical capacity, so that we can progress. And as ever, it is also about if there are additional funds nationally, then being really clear about how we can use those effectively. But I will conclude there, Chair, and happy to take any further questions.
Thank you, Gethin. I invite board members to raise any questions. Got one question coming from Carolyn Donoghue. Please, Carolyn.
Thank you, Chair. I want to just commend that presentation and that plan, because I think it just illustrates not only the scale of the challenge faced, but the innovative and creative approach to addressing those challenges and the amount of work that has gone on to date. So I really want to commend everybody involved in that. I know that you've alluded to the regional working across health boards, and I just wonder how much we're content that we're using that to the full effect. So is there more scope for different health boards to collaborate and to share expertise? And given some of the services that are under great pressure, like pathology, whether there's more scope there, and indeed whether there's more scope across Wales for health boards to work together, because I'm sure people would be willing to travel and to access services further away rather than wait a long time. So I wonder how much of those conversations are happening really. Thank you.
Can I invite?
Can I just come in?
Please.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, just to give you a bit of an overview, we do have now established a chief executives group across ourselves, Cardiff and Vale and Iron Bevan, and we've agreed to focus in on diagnostics as a particular area of opportunity for us to work together. I'm the lead chief exec for the diagnostics work. Suzanne at Cardiff is leading on work around orthopaedics across the three, and Glyn at AB is leading on ophthalmology. All of those areas there is a great deal of potential for us to look at a more joined up approach to how we work together. On the diagnostics piece, we are working quite actively at the moment on radiology, particularly looking at the development of opportunities around community diagnostic centres, which are the aim of which is to take out non-urgent scanning from hospital sites and look at trying to develop more community-based capacity to deliver scans, CT, MRI, ultrasound and other things like that. So we are actively at the moment working with the other two health boards on a proposal around that, which we're in conversations with the Welsh Government on as well. I think pathology, as you highlighted, is a huge opportunity as well. We are in conversation with Cardiff at the moment about opportunities for some shared working to try and sort of secure the service as it is today. But I think candidly, the optimal answer is for an opportunity to bring together pathology services across the region. Mel Barker is on the call, I know, for Lauren today, but Mel has a great deal of experience of developing regional pathology solutions from her previous role in the collaborative, and Mel is working with colleagues in Cardiff and AB at the moment on setting up a working group across the three organisations to think about what the options could look like. I will just put a marker down that one of the challenges in all of this is, first of all, digital technology to support this. If we're going to look at for example, integrated regional pathology service, we need to clearly be able to access the images quickly across all different places. So digital is a key enabler for regionalisation, I think, of pathology. And I know Stuart is very linked in with those conversations at a national level. And also the challenge around capital is also potentially a bit of an issue we're going to have to think through. So it may require us to think a bit creatively about how we use other sources of capital to facilitate some of these ambitions. But there's very clear direction from Welsh Government that we need to be looking at different models for, particularly on the radiology side, because trying to push more and more work through the existing scanning capacity is just not going to be viable. So I think we've made some good progress. I know indeed Emrys has had similar positive conversations with the other chairs from the other two health boards. So all three organisations are very committed to this agenda.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Carolyn, can I then invite in Ian Wells, please?
Yeah, thanks, Emrys. Just a quick question. I think members of the board will be aware of the issues, long-term issues, really, with the digital merger of Bridgend with the old Cwm Taf area. What I've got a question on is in relation to the key risks, and it worries me a little bit in terms of the first key risk. I was hoping that we'd have a bit of an explanation of that in the talk, but I'm still a bit confused because it says with the digital joiner between CT and Bridgend, inequity in lists. I do worry about this digital merger. That might cause inequity between the two halves of the health board area. So I wonder if Gethin could maybe explain what inequity in lists actually means.
Yeah, by all means, I'll explain that bit, Ian, and I'm sure Stuart will come in on some of the other risks then associated with the digital challenge. So at the moment we have differential waiting times, waiting lists between Bridgend and the other two sites in certain specialties, and what we're challenged to do. So if we were following true waiting list evidence base, you would have a single waiting list. We can't create a single waiting list at the moment because of the two systems. So at the moment, what we can't do is, if we've got all of these routine people, is just treat each of them in turn and pull the next longest way to the next longest way to the next longest way to. So what that's resulting is inequity, because a patient in the Bridgend catchment, for example, might wait a shorter period of time than a patient in Llantrisant for the same operation, and that's not right. And so one of the challenges we have at the moment is moving patients is really difficult and exceptionally admin burdensome, and it comes with risk of losing people as we do that. So that's what that risk articulates, but equally vice versa. So if there's a shorter waiting time in Merthyr, again, patients at Bridgend might well be being disadvantaged because they can't be seen. So the operationally, the challenge for me is I want to run one waiting list, and you are called in chronological order through routine work. I cannot create that waiting list at the moment because we run on two separate systems. So that's the operational risk that alludes to.
Thanks, Gethin.
Yeah, could I come in there, Chair, please? Yeah, so as Gethin's articulated the risk, I think it's pretty well documented in terms of the changeover process that we're going to need to go through to get to a single instance of the PAS right across the health board. So in the interim, what I've asked the team to now look at, and we're going to be doing as of the next couple of weeks, actually, is looking at how we can automate some of that administration process using some of the tools that we do have available to us now to actually pool that list, if you like, outside of the single instance, or outside of the PAS, to enable Gethin to proceed with the work he's articulated. So I'm quite confident actually we're going to be able to achieve that within a few weeks' time in terms of the initial run up of it, but it does need some resourcing. It's not part of our original planned work programme, but it's something that we are focusing on now, and more than happy to give a more detailed update to the Digital and Data Committee, Ian, if you like, in terms of how we're going to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks both. That's explained it. I understand it now.
Thank you. Can I then invite James here, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Gethin, thank you for a clear and candid presentation. I wanted to comment on the patient-initiated follow-ups. I think that's very welcome. I agree that it will improve the patient experience, because we're going to have fewer do not attends for routine follow-ups, and that should help to clear the backlog. But I have a question about the number of targets you have in the assumptions for this business year. Knowing the dependency on digitalisation and the workforce challenges, how confident are you that we can actually meet and achieve those challenges with sustainable solutions?
I think it's fair to say, James, that it depends by specialty, and there's a variety of reasons for that. So in some specialties, I'm really confident that we can deliver the ministerial ambition, and we'll be able to do that in probably a reasonable number. The challenge in terms of there are, however, a handful of specialties which are a challenge, not just for in our health board, but across Wales and actually across the whole of the UK, because there is not the number of specialists in that field. So ENT, for example, there just isn't the capacity in any ENT service nationally to deliver that level of activity, and so we've got to, and that's why we're running some work simultaneously. So we've got some tactical solutions, which is, we need to make sure all our lists are full. We need to make sure we're running everything we can possibly run. We need to make sure that our waiting list is fully validated and as clean as we can possibly get it. And those things are really, really important. The challenge around sustainability, though, means that we have to run a number of our services differently now, and you know, be that so if I give you a cancer example, which is we're moving our gynecology service to a one-stop clinic rather than having 3 or 4 attendances we can do that in a different way, and that's much better for the patient. Actually, it's more efficient for us, and we can see those patients in a more timely way. We need to focus our hospitals on doing what they do well, and one of our challenges at the moment, I think, is that we try and do everything everywhere. And so part of the work about, for example, bringing all our orthopedic or joint replacement work onto one site means that we can have a team who are really good at it, constantly delivering it. We have to ring fence those beds because we can't put any other patients with a joint replacement. And actually running those services on lots of different sites means we need lots of small wards, and that's not an effective or efficient way of running it. So it is about trying to make those services more sustainable longer term. It's also about being honest about what's the right intervention for some of these patients, and are we as a health board best placed to do it, or is there another provider that can do it better than we can? And again, we're looking at all of our services and how can we do that in a way that gives the patient the right treatment, gets the patient the right outcome, and we can do that in the most effective way. So it is genuinely looking at all our services and really being clear about how can we deliver those in the best way we can.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks again to Gethin. Unless there are any objections, I suggest the board resolve to note this update. Wendy, can you please confirm if there are any remaining questions or any objections raised, please?
There are none, Chair.
I now propose that we go to take a break, returning back to the meeting at 20 to 12. There has been an issue earlier when we did item 2.1 where the audio wasn't working with the patient story film that we were receiving. We will try and resolve the technical issue during the break. If we're not in a position to resolve the technical issue, then we will have to forego that agenda item and put the film on our website. George, can I just invite you in, please, to just give us a quick update?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you've mentioned, unfortunately, we have been plagued with some technical challenges this morning, so apologies for that. And again, as you've said, we'll make sure that the patient story, which I would encourage everybody to view, because it's a really interesting story about our maternity services, which I know is of significant interest to our communities and the board. So we'll make sure that's put on the website along with the recording of the meeting. We're also having some technical issues, or rather these technical issues are also affecting our ability to spotlight the presentations. So you'll have heard of a few references to presentations this morning. All of the presentations and papers are published on our website. And as you say, Chair, we will make sure during the break we try and resolve those issues so that we can spotlight on the presentations as we go through them for the rest of the meeting. So please bear with us. We'll work through it in the break and try and resolve those. So thanks for your patience.
Thank you, George. If I can just remind colleagues, we reset the meeting again at 11:40. Thank you. Welcome back to the board meeting following our break. As I mentioned before the break, we did have some technical difficulties around the patient story on item 2.1. which I've been informed now that those technical difficulties have been resolved, and this item will come up after agenda item 7. If I could go on to the agenda proper now, on to item 6.3, around maternity and neonatal services improvement programme, please. I invite Greg Dix and Sally Davis to present the report, which is before the board for noting. We recognise that this report has been subject to discussion and scrutiny at a number of forums, including most recently at the Quality and Safety Committee, and therefore will focus on the key issues for board awareness. If I could invite Greg in then, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. the report has slightly changed this month in relation to setting out our progression towards achieving the conditions, the 13 conditions for sustainability, which you will see is now front and centre on the first page of the report. And that's in relation to us stepping down the maternity side of the formal programme of improvement programme of work. So we're still focusing very much on the 3 programmes: safe and effective care, quality of women's experience, leadership and management. But these are transitioning into the normal services as we progress through our journey of maternity improvement, and absolutely we'll still keep an eye on all of the metrics through the Maternity and Neonatal Improvement Board. The clinical teams, in fact, as I'm presenting this today, are in the process of working through the latest IPAF assessment of maternity and neonate. So the IPAF being the Performance Assessment and Assurance Framework. The previous assessment you can see on page 3 of the report, and we'll be presenting the outputs of the latest assessment to the Development Board on the 22nd of next month. Just a couple of successes just to update the board over the last couple of months. We've now closed our clinical, there were almost 1,500 actions from the clinical reviews that have been taking place over the last couple of years. The board will recall we reviewed about 160 cases across 3 categories. So, you know, big thanks to the team for ensuring the closure of these cases, and equally some of these cases included serious incidents, and again all of those have been closed. All of the learning filtered through our governance framework within the both clinical service groups currently. It would be remiss of me not to mention a couple of key risks. I think from a maternity perspective, we just need to keep an eye on the transition from the current ILG model to the care group model. And I've advised the teams to start working on a legacy quality and safety document to ensure smooth transition from the ILG to the care group model. And equally, you will note, because page 3 or page 4 of the report, some of the milestones, due dates have slipped for various reasons. We have proposed revised dates for the maternity milestones, and we're in the process of doing the same for neonates. And I'm sure Dom or Sally can talk us through the neonatal part in a little while. Finally, and you made reference to this, Chair, at the beginning of this section, we did have a really good run through of the metrics at our Quality and Safety Committee last week. Although we somehow, and it was raised at the Quality and Safety Committee, we somehow need to better articulate some of our training compliance figures, which can be found on page 7 of the report. You'll see we have a fairly low compliance with medics from a CTG perspective, so that's the monitoring of a woman in labour. These figures are slightly skewed due to the low numbers of obstetricians that need to go through that particular training module, but nevertheless we probably need to do better to better reassure both the Quality Committee and then obviously this board. In fact, just tomorrow, Chair, myself and the Vice Chair will be undertaking a new 15-step challenge process within PCH maternity unit. So this is part of our triangulated assurance method. So the 15-step challenge is a toolkit that was developed some years ago in NHS Institute of Innovation and Improvement, in which it's very much based on first impressions, staff experience, patient experience, the care environment, safety metrics. So more of an enhanced IM exec patient safety walk around. So we've got that tomorrow afternoon with the maternity team, and we'll feed that back through the governance processes in terms of further strengthening the triangulated assurance piece. That's it from a maternity perspective, Chair. If I can hand over to Dom to talk us through the neonatal bit, and then clearly happy to answer, respond to any questions. Thanks very much, Dom.
Look, thank you, everyone. So Sally Davis is the Deputy Medical Director. She's the SRO for this project, but obviously I'm heavily involved as well. just want to bring a few points. I know you've seen the paper and I won't go through the whole thing. The neonate is at a very different stage it is from the maternity. We have a big review coming up in September where the panel overseeing us will be making a recommendation to Welsh Government as to whether we need to continue with monitoring or whether they can step that down. Now, a lot of that relies upon us providing them with the evidence from the deep dives that we have made, the changes that are required. And I can see by looking at this was submitted in June, that there's obviously some concern that you will have picked up on, and I'll address directly, but we have 6 of our 19 immediate recommendations need to have been met and been signed off by the IMSOP group. Now that does look, and there's a lovely graph in there on page 3 that makes it look how small that is in comparison. We are at tipping point with pretty well all the other points. So it's not that we haven't had them signed off, we're just getting very, very close to it, but it's just taking time. And these are obviously the slightly trickier ones. A lot of the problem is down to providing evidence to the IMSOP, is that we have provided them with a set of evidence, and that's fine. And I'll give you an example of one, which was an intubation policy. We had to show that we had a new guideline for how we were going to develop and approach and manage these cases. And that's fine. We put a guideline in place and we send that guideline to the IMSOP panel to show that we have it. And understandably, they aren't happy with just seeing a piece of paper that says here's a new guideline on it. What they want to see is that's embedded and that's in use. So what we haven't done is provided the evidence of that to it. So we're now having multiple times a week for the next 6 weeks meetings between the clinicians and the panel with a different theme each week to go through all of these so they can demonstrate the evidence, provide the evidence that way that they are doing it, they are complying, how they're being managing these cases by following these guidelines. And that was kind of the point. We provided the paper evidence, but not so much the practical evidence of it actually happening on the shop floor and as a change in our culture. So with that in place, that will start tipping the balance on all the other requirements that have been set out at the moment. So I'm assured that we are on the right track for that. As I said, we've got 6 weeks until the review happens in place, and I know that this looks bad, but I'm assured by the team, and I'm also speaking to the team, I know that they're fully engaged in that to meet that target. This is why there's a point here on a very high risk on the top programme risks and issues. That work is underway for the operational cost consequences of this. What IMSOP have asked for eventually works out effectively as £1.5 million investment on top of what we've already got to be able to make ourselves an exemplar service. Now, at the moment, with the cost and the financial situation it is, it's unlikely we're going to be able to put that much investment directly into that. But there is a papers appraisal going on at the moment about what we can do and have the strategy and the time plan of how we can actually meet that. So that's happening in place. And then the other bits that I wanted to bring to your attention, which is on page 6, there are a number of sort of the RAG-rated points that we need to achieve here. A lot of these that look like they are red are beginning to turn. For example, there's an audit process in place at the moment. The Patient Safety Culture Survey, the survey is actually being launched. We're going through the process of collecting the data on that at the moment. Same for the traditional care data collection and our radiology service specifically in there about finding a specialist consultant radiologist that is firmly in place now, and we believe we'll have that signed off, completely turned around by the beginning of September. So there are issues in here. I'm not going to hide away from those facts that it's not looking good at the moment, but I'm far more reassured by the teams, and actually pleased to see in the last week and the last few days positive reports coming back from the IMSOP panel as well about how pleased they are with the new engagement and the new process. So we're definitely on track to meet this 6-week goal. I'm happy to take any questions on that anyone's got.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Dom. I invite board members to raise any questions. Patsy.
Yeah, just one question. Thanks, Dom. On page 8, it's the rotation observations graph. It states this is the first time I've seen this metrics, or the first time it's been included. But what does good look like on this graph? Because I don't know. Thank you.
Helps me take the mic off before I answer, isn't it? Yeah, no, it's It was basically a demonstration graph showing that we had staff that were rotating between there. The idea that each nurse would have a week when they rotate through to one of the tertiary centres, and consultants would go for 2 days or so. I haven't really got a metric to show you what good looks like within that, and it's probably not the right graph in many ways to actually be able to demonstrate that. But if we've got, of our 9 neurologists, I would expect you to see a graph there, the scale being on there saying 9, but we're asking them to do it over a course of 3 months. So we're asking them to do it every week. Let me tighten up on that data for and try and give it in a slightly more better way of presenting it. I think we just wanted to demonstrate to you all that we actually have this process in place, that the staff were starting to move across there, just as an assurance piece for you that it's happening. Is that okay? Sorry.
Right. Can I then invite Jane in, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for presenting this paper. I just wanted to come in and give some further assurance around the level of scrutiny that is given to the maternity and neonatal issues at Quality and Safety Committee. We met recently and we spent quite some time actually scrutinising this paper in detail. In addition to that, I attend the Maternity and Neonatal Improvement Board as an independent member, and I'm also actively participating in the detailed evidence review in relation to the neonatal evidence in relation to the improvement requirements there. And I can confirm what Dom says in terms of the approach being taken, which is not just saying we've introduced a process, but actually proving that it is a changed process, it is being operated in practice, and that change is sustained. And we're starting to see that now in the evidence that is coming through, which is gratifying. We also have talked a lot about the dashboards that we're using to monitor the performance of the services. Each time we see them, they get better, but there's still a need to tweak them so we can answer questions like the one that Patsy's just asked. Okay, we've got data. What does it actually mean, and what should it be? And I'm looking forward very much to visiting PCH tomorrow and doing my first 15 steps visit to the services. I hope that gives the board some more assurance, though. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Are there any further comments or questions, Wendy?
No, Chair.
Thanks to both Greg and Dom for the report. Unless there are any objections, I suggest the board resolves to note this report. Okay, can I then move on to item 6.4, please? Teeth Lydiard Improvement Plan. I invite Anna Llewellyn to present the report, which is before the board for noting, having been most recently discussed at the Quality and Safety Committee on the 19th of July 2022.
Good morning, Chair and members of the board. As this paper hasn't been before the board for some time, visibility around Teeth Lydiard, I thought I'd introduce the paper for members of the public and members of the board who are not members of the Quality and Safety Committee, just to give an introduction to what Teeth Lydiard is. So Teeth Lydiard is an inpatient service for the whole of South Wales. It serves 6 health boards, including ours, and serves child and adolescent mental health services, a small group of young people who need inpatient care. It's commissioned by WISC, Welsh Health Specialised Services Committee, and we've been working with WISC for some time around some challenges that we've had within the service. It's here before board today because we have had communication with WISC around a requirement for sustained and more support focus for the improvement programme, and in light of that, Lauren Edwards has been appointed as the executive lead for the improvement programme. We've had a refresh of the improvement action plan, taking into consideration improvements that WISC have in relation to escalation, but also work that we're doing with the service around generalised improvement. And we're meeting with WISC monthly, and our improvement board also meets monthly. We've had our first improvement board very recently. I'd also like to share with the committee some really interesting work. Our view is that sustained improvement will only be achieved if we empower the people within the service to lead that improvement. And we've had a really successful engagement event at the end of April, where we engaged with staff, previous service users and current service users about the direction going forward. Really rich material. One of the outcomes of that engagement event was, it's embedded in the paper, a new logo that will inform the identity, which is being co-produced with young people and will form the basis of uniforms and logos in the environment. Also opening up T-Llydiod is one of only 2 inpatient services in Wales. So in terms of peer support, it doesn't benefit from the peer support that other inpatient services have. So working much more closely with the North Wales unit and inviting lots of people in, to lots of stakeholders to share their views, working closely with the Children's Commissioner around young people's engagement. Also invited the Deputy Minister, Health Minister, very recently to the inpatient service also. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Anna. I invite board members to raise any questions. We have the first one coming, and Dilys, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to comment on the engagement event reported in the report. First of all, congratulations to having so many people there. And I really love the logo that our young people have come up with. Just the one question is, obviously when you have a consultation event, you have comments and opinions. How are you going to act on the feedback that was given to you during the consultation event?
Thank you, Dilys. Yeah, so the comments and feedback, we had an open event at the end of April, but also got wider feedback from a range of stakeholders. All of that will be aggregated and form part of the integrated action plan and will be taken forward through the improvement board. It is worth noting that much of the feedback that we had from young people, their families and wider stakeholders were things that we were already working on. So our young people told us that they felt that at times they were bored and had limited activities, and you'll note in the paper that there are times where the workforce has had to provide really intensive input to young people, and this has resulted in planned activities not being taken forward. So we've done some work to review the skill mix so that we have more people on a shift, also working to change the clinical model, so a greater therapies input also. So yeah, really rich feedback and really well received, and we're absolutely taking it forward through the improvement boards.
Thank you.
Can I invite Paul Mears, our Chief Executive, to comment before Patsy and Jane, please? Paul.
Thanks, Emrys. I mean, I just wanted to recognise really the significant work that's gone on with the staff at T-Llydiod. As Anna knows, having been involved with this for quite a long time, this has been quite a long journey, and there've been and the level of external scrutiny and input into the unit is significant from all different courses, and that can be really challenging, I think, for staff when you're constantly feeling you've got scrutiny, and people externally looking over your shoulder and wanting to know what's going on. But they've done a really good job of turning things around, really focusing in on how we make the service much more patient and young person centred. I think the developments around the additional resources that have been brought in from WISC to support the increasing number of therapists and other professionals into the team will be a significant development as well, because I think everyone will acknowledge that it's a fantastic facility, TTDR, you know, in terms of the space there, the facilities that are there, but we just haven't had the level of therapeutic support available previously to almost make the best of the resource available. So I think it's going to be a really great step forward. And I know Lauren, working with Anna and other colleagues, have got some really good ideas of how we can involve the young people also much more in helping shape how those activities develop. So I just really wanted to say, you know, I had a conversation with WISC last week, and there was very positive feedback from them about what they were seeing going on in the unit. And as mentioned, the positive feedback from the Minister, Deputy Minister, and Judith Paget also was there as well. They were both very positive about what they'd seen. So it does really feel that we are, for a service that probably, I don't know, 15 months or so ago we were all quite concerned about, it feels like we've made some really good inroads. Now, that's not to say there isn't still further work to do. There is always further work to do, isn't there? But I think it feels in a much better place and a much more forward-looking place than it perhaps was a year or so ago. And so just to say thank you to Anna and Lloyd, the lead nurse down there, and all the other clinical teams who've really pulled their socks up and really put the effort in to really turn the situation around. So yeah, really glad to see the improvement that's gone on.
Chair, is it okay if I come back on that before you invite other people? I just want to say thank you, and I will absolutely convey that to colleagues at Teesside Yard. Paul is right, the scrutiny has been challenging, and saying thank you to our colleagues for their work is really important, and they will really feel appreciated, and I'll absolutely convey that to all of them.
Thank you, Anna. If I could then invite Patsy in, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Anna. I mostly wanted to say thank you for this paper because it was so informative, and this is an area where I'm not particularly familiar, but this told me everything I needed to know in one paper that was very easy to read and very self-explanatory. So thank you very much for that. My question has partly been picked up by Dilys, and you partly answered it, and it was around the feedback of boredom being one of the major issues for the young people in Teesside. And I wonder if there is any access for these people, recognising what their particular issues are, for physical activity. I don't know if that's
yes.
an impossible ask, or if that's something that can happen, but that will help resolve some of the boredom issues. Thanks.
Yes. Patsy, firstly, I'd really love you to come and visit, because as Paul said, the facilities are fantastic. There is a gym at Teesside Yard, and there is lots of opportunity in terms of the physical resources for physical activity. I think the historical challenge has been the staffing and the skill mix. So at times, some of those planned physical activities have not been able to take place because of requiring more intensive input for perhaps other children who have been admitted. So we've reviewed the skill mix, much more staff on duty, and also the resource that we've gratefully received from WISC and Welsh Government will mean that we're employing activities coordinators who will be available at evenings and weekends. So all of that planned programme, there'll be no risk of it not taking place, and that will obviously include physical activities also.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Patsy. If I could then invite in Jane, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Anna, for the presentation. I'm coming in again as Chair of Quality and Safety Committee to give the board assurance that we have scrutinised this improvement programme in detail. and Anna has kept us well informed, both in terms of the plans and then in terms of the operational delivery of those plans. Improvement journeys take a long time when they're addressing the range of issues that needed to be addressed at Tyllyddiad. And as I said earlier, in relation to maternity and neonates, it's not sufficient just to make the change. It actually has to be embedded and become sustainable and become the new way that things are done. I'm very hopeful that the recruitment of therapists, which is now ongoing, will be a major component in terms of transformation at Tyllyddiad. But I'm very aware that Anna and the team are not complacent. They accept that there are things which have not been as we would have wanted them to be, and are committed to thinking differently and doing differently. I think part of our job is actually to demonstrate to our stakeholders that that's the case also. And hopefully we are doing that now, because we need to regain their confidence. But I'd also join with Paul in saying thank you to Anna and thank you to all the staff at Tyllyddiad for the work that they're doing. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Jane. If I could then invite Mel in, please.
Thank you, Chair. And may I just repeat what others have said, Anna? A big thank you to you and the team for all the work that you're doing. But of course, it is ongoing. And if I could take you to 7.2, where the paragraph says about changes to the clinical model within Tyllyddiad and improvements relating to leadership and culture within the unit have made it significant. And it goes on and on. I just like, for me, and perhaps for others who really don't understand Tyllyddiad in grid. If I was to come down, how would you describe the change in leadership and the culture? What does the leadership look like now, and what is the culture now? We know what it was previously, so how can you verbalise what the leadership and culture is now there and how it feels?
Yeah, oh, that's a really good question, Mel. For me, because I've been part of the journey, what I would describe it as now is more open, more transparent, more inclusive, more outward looking, much more empowered. I think there was a sense in the team of some learned helplessness and almost waiting for the latest report to develop an action plan, whereas now what we have is people feeling empowered to make suggestions and being part of the solutions rather than having solutions prescribed for them. What I would say is we're not where we want to be in terms of the leadership. We have a number of key posts that aren't in place yet, particularly the head of therapies. But what we do have is an ambition and a drive towards excellence, perhaps in a way that we didn't have before. So absolutely not where we want to be. And, you know, we have an improvement board, and absolutely the ambition is that at some point we're able to de-escalate that so that leaders like myself and the board and Lauren and certainly WISC don't need to take such a close interest in the service. But yeah, it feels very different going there, and I think members of the board who have also visited will, I don't want to speak for them, but I'm sure they will say similarly.
Yeah, I suppose, Anna, what I'd like then to say is, so having gone through the journey that you've gone on and are still going through, are there issues that could be transferable to other areas of our organisation that they could learn from your experience?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is, for me, one of the key things in terms of the Tyllyddiad improvement has been to remind colleagues gently that we as a health board are there to serve the young people and their families rather than the external stakeholders. Well, they're very important, and they have a role to play. But I think what we'd got into with Teith Lydiard is our colleagues were focused on the external action plans rather than what do our young people need. You know, let's listen to our young people and focus and, you know, remind ourselves of our training and the skills that we have to carve our own path going forward. That's quite a nuanced, yeah, that's quite a nuanced answer, but I think empowering our people, I think, has been really helpful.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because that's at the heart of what we do. And if I just reflect, and Paul might want to comment on this as well, Paul and I met with the Merthyr Forum, you know, and mental health and CAMS and all that stuff was a big, big issue for them. And I know I believe both of us learned a lot from just what they were saying about the way we configure our services and the way we do things with them at the forefront of everything. So, Anna, once again, thank you for that, and thank you for your candour as well and for your honesty. Delighted to hear you and read the report. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mel. Thank you, Anna. If I can invite Paul in then, please.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, I mean, just to follow up really on Mel's point, and really just to add to what Anna said, I think the other thing that I don't know, Anna probably will agree, is it's also been an opportunity, I think, to really focus on making sure that the model of care we deliver at Teith Lydiard is really truly multi-professional, and that actually we recognise every professional's got an equal contribution to make to the conversation about the service and how it's developed, but also to the care of the individuals, because, you know, these are young people with quite complex challenges, and yes, there's a medical dimension to it, of course, but there's also, as Anna's just described earlier, the therapeutic support for these individuals, the psychology support for these individuals, the nursing care needs of the individual, and all of those needs need to be brought together. So in terms of your question, Mel, about learning, I suppose it shows the real benefit of true multi-professional working around any patient, whether you're a complex CAMS patient or an older person with complex needs or anybody, that the recognition of the equal value of everyone's contribution is, I think, a really important learning. And as Anna rightly said, it's a really important, I think, learning for us about often we forget the sort of softer side of what's impacting on people's health and well-being that can often be as much, if not more important to them than the actual clinical condition that they're being treated for. And I think there's also learning for us in all sorts of other service areas for that. And it brings us back to that point about really asking the individual what's important to you and what would make you feel better. And quite often, more often than not, it'll be nothing to do with what a medical or nursing professional is actually recommending. It's going to be something completely additional. But I think it's been a really good experience for us on that. And I think, as Anna said, the ability to listen to individuals and really get them involved in shaping how the services are developed is a really important point. So yeah, I think there's a lot of learning, and it probably something actually, Anna, we should probably think about actually asking the staff to think through that sort of change in mindset and culture, because there's a lot there that could inform some of the other thinking we're trying to do in terms of embedding that sort of approach in other services.
Yeah, they're a great team, full of ideas. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Anna. Thanks to Anna for the report. In the absence of any objections, I would suggest that the board resolves to note this report. Wendy, can you please confirm if there are any remaining questions or any objections raised, please?
There are none, Chair.
Thank you. If I could then move on to item 6.5, please, which is the continuous improvement self-assessment process in response to targeted intervention. I invite Richard Morgan-Evans to present the update, which describes a refined approach to targeted intervention and is before the board for noting. Richard.
Diolch, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. A paper in your packs to note around sort of TI progress, and I'll just pick up a few points in the paper, if I may. Looking back to May just gone, there was a really sort of key meeting with Welsh Government. The executive team met with their counterparts. And really, after about sort of 3 years of targeted intervention process and improvement, which has been positive, a decision was taken to refine the scope of targeted intervention, which is great news. And the paper sort of reflects that in some detail, noting that in August, 22nd of August, we have the next TI and Special Measures Board. Just as a reminder to people watching or to board members, obviously 3 overarching improvement areas around leadership and culture, trust and confidence, and quality and governance. And we've had many different sort of sessions, including showcase sessions over the last sort of year or so to really highlight some of the great activities going on. And indeed, some of these activities have been shared at today's sort of board. Where we've ended up on the now historic sort of maturity matrices, the self scores, if you like, are shown on pages 2 and 3 there. And this shows some great work and great improvement across the 13 domains, which really covers the full breadth of the health board. And we've landed between sort of results and maturity, which is absolutely where we wanted to sort of get to, and where we've been told a couple of times is where Welsh Government would expect health boards to be. Clearly always striving to be better across all areas, but noting that the improvements could always be made. So jumping on to sort of page 4 now is we're moving to very much in line with the Special Measures Improvement Programme, moving to the conditions for sustainability, which I think is a really positive move and a much more refined and honed scope. And that's listed across those pages. And I've created a handy sort of 1-page conditions for sustainability, which is on the bottom of page 5 for you. So really boiling it all down onto 1 page. And these are the sort of the topics and the improvement themes that both Welsh Government and us think that we need to just continue to sort of work on and try and take things to the next level. So looking at the quality and governance is about embedding improvement. So later in August, we'll talk about the unified transformation portfolio and how we're trying to prioritise some of our improvement activities. Integrated performance and quality. So Greg and George are doing a lot of great work, around learning lessons and trying to sort of make sure that learning loop is embedded as part of the culture of the organisation. Structures and delivery. So later on this board agenda, I believe we have an update on the operating model to try to make sure that is structured and fit for purpose as we go into the future with the challenges that Gethin outlined earlier on at the board. In terms of leadership and culture, clearly a sustained focus on this, as I think most of the board would agree with, and in terms of leadership and management skills, strategic workforce planning. Some of that's been referenced as we've gone through today, and trying to maximise the skills of our sort of current staff and look at future configurations, as well as values and behaviours, making sure they're embedded and demonstrated throughout the organisation in the work that we're doing. And finally, trust and confidence, and that's holistic as well, staff, patient and public engagement and involvement. And I know there's a lot of good work going on with the clinical services strategy engagement at the moment, and it has been for several weeks now, and we'll try and have an update on that at the next TI board in August. So that's all been boiled down into the conditions for sustainability. The next TI board will be consisting of 2 parts. It will be the final time the Special Measures Improvement Programme self-assesses, and Greg sort of touched on that and touched on some of the workups taking place now around maternity and neonatal services, and as well as more of a modern holistic update on TI, because now looking forward to September, October, is when HIW and Audit Wales are due to do their follow-up review of the health board. So that's obviously a really important milestone for us to make sure that A, we're ready for it, and B, that it's a good review. We can then take on board any sort of feedback or recommendations to continue to improve. So we look forward to that review, and as we get more details on that, we can obviously sort of feed that back to the board and wider members. So August 22nd will be the next time that the improvement board meets and therefore discusses some of these topics and unpacks them in more detail, and then look forward to updating the board in a couple of months, including more detail around the HIW and Audit Wales review. I think that's all I have now, Emrys, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I invite board members to raise any questions. There doesn't appear to be any questions, okay, or comments. Thanks to Richard for the report. In the absence of any objections, I suggest the board resolves to note this report. And just to confirm, Wendy, can you confirm if there are any remaining questions or any objections raised, please?
There are none, Chair.
Thank you. I could then move on to item 7, please, which is delivering our purpose and strategic direction, and go on to item 7.1, integrated performance dashboard. This report is before the board for noting, and has most recently been discussed at a number of forums, including most recently at the Executive Leadership Group. This report has been scrutinised by our various board committees prior to it coming before the board. I invite Linda Prosser to introduce the report, bring in relevant executive leads to provide updates against their respective areas. Linda.
Thank you, Chair. The first thing I wanted to do in introducing this report is to reflect on some of the changes that we're now starting to see in this report, where we're seeing trajectories set out. So from page 4 to 9, you can see the trajectories for the quadruple aims, which are those that we're trying to achieve in support of a healthier Wales. And I think it makes it easier to see and to get a sense across the whole arc of activities of where we are. And I think the board can see that some things are going in the right direction, but not everything is. And but most of what I was going to focus on in this report, and usually do, we've covered in depth already in relation to urgent care and planned care. So I won't repeat any of that. But what you will see on page 9 is also the planned care recovery measures set out again with the trajectory. So I think that's a helpful way of being able to see the progress over the months. So I hope that that's welcome. Yeah, as I said, some things are going in the right direction, and I know that that we will start to see more things going in the right direction as we are picking up the activity and catching up after the delays that COVID caused. I guess there's one area where people might want to come in, which we haven't discussed, although that was discussed in the PPF, the performance. What's the P? What's the other P? The performance and finance group, which is the performance around stroke. And I know that we are conscious that the stroke performance is nowhere near where we want it to be. I think that's on page 19. But we are working with the services, particularly getting our conscious that we need to do some intensive work at Princess of Wales to understand what we need to do better there to get patients treated more appropriately. And we're conscious that it links in with some of the 6 goals activities around creating and protecting beds. So improvement in one area will create improvement in the other. I think members will have questions around parts of the report, but I wasn't going to go into any of the finance because that's coming up. Sally's going to present that next.
Okay, thank you, Linda. I invite board members to raise any questions. Can I firstly invite Patsy in, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Linda. I've got 2 very different questions, so perhaps if I ask the first one and get a response. On page 13 of the dashboard, there is albeit accrued mortality rates distribution chart, and CTM appears to be quite a bit higher than the other health boards. The reason given for that is that CTM offer palliative care and hospice services. Does that mean the other health boards don't provide palliative care and hospice services, or at least don't within their main reporting framework?
This is a measure of deaths in hospital. And so if the palliative care is provided in an off-site service, it doesn't show in these figures.
But yeah,
so if there's a hospice, it won't show, whereas our hospice services are within our acute sites, so it does show.
So what we're saying is the other health boards don't include palliative care and hospice. That's the basis of my question. Do they?
The other, so I'm trying to say, yeah, sorry, I'm not making it very clear. The other health boards have off-site hospices.
So they are not included in this data.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. My other question is probably more for Gethin, actually, on page 31, and you'd probably expect this from me. And it's around the ambulance handover actions. Now, I know it was alluded to and talked about a little bit in the earlier presentation around the 6 goals. And I can see the graphs of the trajectory, but I want to know what's happening now to help patients this afternoon, tomorrow, over the weekend, because I can absolutely see all the good work that's within the strategy and within the 6 goals, but that's going to take a while, particularly clearing beds through the hospital site is really a major piece of work. So what's happening now to help those patients in the communities today?
Thanks, Patsy. So I guess the first thing is there's 2 challenges, aren't there? The first is, how do we ensure the patients that are currently on an ambulance waiting to be offloaded are well cared for? And then secondly, it's how can we quickly release those ambulances as best we can and as safely as we can to ensure that those resources are released back to respond to urgent cases in our communities. So in terms of the first bit, I think it is important to note that we, all of those patients have, if we cannot offload them, do have a doctor assessment on board the ambulance. So it is not that they are waiting in an undifferentiated way. They have been seen. They have been seen by a senior doctor. If required, they will come off the ambulance for a diagnostic. So if we're concerned that they need a CT scan, they will come off and have the scan, and unfortunately will then have to go back onto the ambulance to wait until there is an appropriate space. But this is, and we will take patients off the ambulance in when we have ambulances delayed in clinical priority. So the sickest patients will come off first. We do ensure, so that's the first piece. The second bit is, of course, our staff continue to support the ambulance crews on board as well. The second bit is, how do we get those patients off more quickly, and how do we reduce the overall quantum of delay? And there are some immediate actions we're taking. So we've worked with WAST, as all health boards in Wales have, to move towards a new red release policy. So I was on call director last night, and we were struggling to release a crew last night. So I was telephoned at midnight midnight last night to work out a plan to get a patient offloaded so that we could release that ambulance there and then. So we are now really pushing very hard to ensure that our red release activity is done there and then. The challenge we have, and I think it is really important for board to understand the context, is that a large proportion of patients in our waiting room are sometimes sicker than those that are waiting on ambulances. So a large proportion of patients are self-presenting with stroke, with heart attacks, with significant GI bleeds, because of some of those challenges of waiting for an ambulance. So we know that, and that's part of the ongoing conversation we have with WAST is managing the acuity of the patients on the ambulance and the acuity of the patients in our waiting room, and making sure that the sickest patient in total gets into that bed as quickly as possible. So that remains an ongoing challenge. And this is why some of those pieces that we do of trying to, we're trying to increase our fit to sit areas. We've got some real focus on getting patients off more quickly. You know, our discharges moved more quickly because, as I said earlier, one of our big problems is that our discharge profile and our arrival profile don't align properly at the moment. And so it is doing some really tactical things about making sure we're sitting patients out if they're ready to go home, so that we can move a patient straight up to that bed. So it's all of those pieces. The challenge at the moment, and I think what we're seeing, and this is where we're trying to do the rapid learning between sites, is we probably see a larger proportion of our delays on the Princess of Wales site than we do on the other two sites. And so part of what we're doing is working very intensely with Princess of Wales and the teams there to understand what things we can do differently. So we had a really challenging day yesterday. I had to declare a business continuity incident at Princess of Wales yesterday for several hours in order to give us the headspace to try and get the hospital back into a safer space. And so today there is a rapid there's a debrief session going on at the moment, understanding what are the things that we did differently as part of that yesterday that created some of that capacity. So that's the work that's ongoing every day, Patsy, to try and ensure we do not want to hold ambulances at all, and we need to be in a position where we can release those that do need to be released quickly.
Patsy, in relation to your first question, Dom Herford, our medical director, would like to comment on mortality. Dom.
Yes, so specifically, just back over to what Linda was saying, is that when I'm about to present in later on, when we talk about our quality statement, we talk about mortality in that. I just want to sort of reassure that the data is there that our in-crude hospital mortality actually has decreased from 3.4 to 2.66, which is below our average. But yes, our crude mortality data is higher than it seems for the Welsh average. But again, that is because we include the palliative care deaths as acute deaths because they happen on our acute sites. So that's why there is that gap between there. Now, one other health board does do that as well and produces, let me start again. There's only one other health board that actually includes their palliative care data in that, and funnily enough, they're the second highest when you look at that data as well. So that's the reasons why.
Thank you, Dom. Thank you, Patsy. If I could then invite in Nicola, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Linda. I have two questions also, which are very different. And my first, you have touched a little bit on, it's about our stroke position, Linda. And if we look at page 34, it talks about short-term action plan in March to be reviewed in April. And in March, when that was written, our compliance was 7.6%. We're now at 2.9%. So clearly, whatever the short-term actions didn't work. And what it does say on there is a date for when we can expect improvement, but there's no date of improvement. And Gethin and I very recently in May paid a visit to the stroke unit in PCH, where they'd undertaken some excellent work by some really dedicated and motivated staff. But one of the biggest concerns that were raised, as everywhere, is a shortage of nurses, but also a shortage of specialist stroke nurses. So I'm just wondering, Linda, what are we doing? When can we expect to see an improvement? And what dates are we looking at now? Because there's nothing written in on page 34. You're on mute, Linda, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, Gethin, I don't know if you want to comment on this specifically. I mean, I do know that this is the subject of some focused improvement work in both across ops and planning, but I'm not over the detail, I'm afraid.
Gethin?
Yeah, thanks, Emrys. Yeah, as we picked up, Nicola, when we went to Prince Charles, there are those challenges, and so part of the work that I'd asked the ILG to come forward with is what those plans are, and Lauren Edwards is leading is the exec lead on stroke and is taking those issues forward. I think the challenge we've got at the moment, and there is one line in there that I think really drives that home is if you look at the fact that and it comes back to the ambulance handover conversation we've just been having, only 40% of our strokes are now presenting by ambulance. So, you know, one of the things that I'm used to is an ambulance pre-alert, and that if they think there is a fast positive patient on their ambulance, then that patient can come through straight away, go straight into the scanner, and will be thrombolyzed. So the challenge we've got at the moment is we don't have, you know, a far smaller proportion of our patients are coming with that pre-alert, and then it's through the booking in process and the triage process, isn't it, clearly, that we've got to identify that we've potentially got a fast positive patient in the department. The other challenge we have, and this is an issue across for all our sites, is moving patients on. And it's a particular pertinent issue at Princess of Wales, because we don't at this moment in time have an early supported stroke model. We don't have a stroke rehab facility for those patients, and so the main stroke unit does get currently blocked, which is why we then see the poor performance on patients getting through to the stroke unit and being assessed by a stroke specialist. So there is a big, it is probably worth perhaps at a board development session or at the next board meeting, us bringing an update on the actions being taken around stroke, because there are a myriad of actions being taken, and you know, and I'm very conscious that Lauren is leading a number of those, and it probably is better that Lauren brings those and articulates those in that plan, if that's helpful.
I think that would be helpful.
Can I just add this as well? I mean, the other thing I think as Gethin said, it'd be really useful to have perhaps a bit of a session on stroke, because there is quite a lot of work going on stroke, not just within our own health board, but we are part of wider work with Cardiff and other neighbours to look at how we develop a more structured stroke network across ourselves and neighbours, because I think we'd all acknowledge, as you rightly said, Nicola, one of the biggest pressures is the staffing, whether it's nursing staffing or medical staff. And actually, there's an opportunity here to think a bit more creatively about how we can create some sustainability in some of our rotas by working in collaboration with our neighbours. And there's also a bit of national work which is just about to kick off, looking at what a future model of stroke care needs to be across Wales. So it feels like quite an opportune moment, perhaps, to have a bit of a focus at a board development session with Lauren, and we could indeed invite the stroke lead from Cardiff, who's helping coordinate the approach to stroke across South East Wales, to that session as well, just to bring everyone up onto the same page, because I think we are not going to be able to resolve this solution on our own. We're going to need to work in collaboration with our neighbours, because as others have highlighted, the shortage of specialist skills in this field is not unique to us in South East Wales or Wales. It's a UK-wide challenge, so it's going to need us to think a bit more creatively about how we use other professionals in different ways to support the development of stroke care.
Thank you, Paul and Gethin. I think, you know, that would be beneficial, because we hear a lot about the challenges and the difficulties. I'm not sure we quite hear about the actions or the plans to move forward. So that would be very welcome, I'm sure. And my second question then is on page 8, and I have asked this question at a previous committee meeting and still haven't received a response. And it's in regards to the 71% staff engagement. I mean, none of our previous matrix have ever supported a 71% staff engagement. If we look at our engagement with the staff survey, we performed the poorest out of the whole of Wales. Our engagement with our PDRs is 55.5%. So I'm not quite sure what the 71% is, what are they engaging with, and what are we classing? Because there's absolutely no detail as to that 71%. So it would be really beneficial to have something as to what are we classing as staff engagement?
Who's the best person to respond to that?
Yeah, so Michelle's on the call, isn't she? I think. Yeah. So I don't know if Michelle wants to jump in on that point. Michelle.
Yeah, I actually don't know myself what it relates to. I'd have to go away and look, if I'm honest. So if you can leave it with me, I can have a look at what it does relate to and come back and give a response, if that's all right.
That would be great, Michelle, but I have asked the question in a previous meeting and still waiting a response. So if you could, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll rather than try and guess, I'll go away and have a look. All right, not a problem.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Thank you, and noting that action too. Dom, did you want to come in on something?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to respond to that specifically. I can tell you where the medical specific engagement comes from, and that's from the GMC survey that we have of all medical doctors, and it then feeds back into each health board and trust across England as well. So I know that our number engagement for that was around the 68-67%. So I think that probably contributed to the overall 71% on there, but I can only answer that for the medical side. Sorry again, Nicola.
Thank you, Dom, and Michelle's taken that away as an action. Have I got any further questions in respect of this item? No?
None listed, Chair.
None listed, okay. Thanks to colleagues for their contributions in the absence of any objections. I suggest that the board resolves to note this report. I then move on to item 7.1.2, which is quality performance. I invite Greg Dix, Dom Herford and Georgina Galafley to present their respective areas in relation to the update which is before the board for noting. Colleagues will know that this report has received scrutiny at the recent Quality and Safety Committee and will therefore encourage a focus on key areas for board awareness. Greg, Dom and Georgina, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just one point from my perspective I'd like to raise before I hand over to Dom and George, and that's around our IP&C, so our infection prevention and control metrics, which is detailed within the report. So unlike previous years, Welsh Government have sent us through an 18-month reduction target, which has now been disaggregated across currently our ILGs and then going forward the care group. So there's local ownership in relation to the reduction targets. We are in the midst of reviewing our infection prevention and control resource, and this is largely related to community and primary care, where we currently have limited resource, and we are seeing and we have seen an increase in E. coli infections. So as 62% of our patients with E. coli, it's community acquired, and C. difficile infections, where 57% of our patients admitted with C. diff is from a community facility. Now, the source of both of these infections is largely focused on urosepsis, so issues with catheters or incontinence, etc. And we are working with some local care homes in relation to this regard. So as I just mentioned, we have limited resource currently out within the community, but we are working with our IP&C team. Now they have a little bit more capacity with COVID, as the COVID currently is, to ensure we have some better oversight and resource within those community areas. It has been a bit of a challenge in engaging some of our primary care, so some of our GP colleagues, to contribute to some of the root cause analysis discussions and IP&C huddles within the community, although Sarah Bradley, one of our management leads, and some of our senior nurses are really supporting us within that space. And we have a really good process now in Bridgend, which we will share with the other localities currently. All that said, we have performed better than Q1 last year across several of our Tier 1 IP&C targets. So from a C. difficile perspective, 32% fewer cases than Q1, and from an E. coli perspective, 16% fewer cases than Q1, and the same for Klebsiella. So, you know, some challenge could be put into that in relation to our heightened IP&C precautions due to COVID, but nevertheless, you know, that is good news from a patient safety perspective. Regrettably, we have seen a couple of MRSA bacteremia infections in which we have 0 targets to that. So both of these were unavoidable and related to a patient that was self-catheterization themselves in the community, and somebody with endocarditis, so a heart infection. So there were no lapses in care essentially in relation to these particular infections. So big focus now coming forward this year on our IP&C Tier 1 targets. It's a key safety metric for us as an organisation and clearly for our patients, and look forward to progressing the improvement work with the teams over the next year. That's it from me, Chair. I think I'm handing over to Dom now and then to George. Thank you very much.
Dom.
Thank you, Greg. I've got two things to raise with you. One, medication incidence and hospital mortality, but as I've already covered the mortality in another section, I won't go over that again here unless people have got questions specifically. So the medication incidence, I see that, as you can see from the graph, there is a significant decline in the number of prescription errors from 15 down to 8, and also has been a decline from 38 to 32 in administration errors. Still too many in my book, and I'm sure many of you would agree with that. The pharmacy team are working on a really good, strong plan about how we start dealing with more of the administration errors. The one thing I will going to just raise, which I'm just going to alert our chair of quality and safety to, I'm going to bring this to her. World Safety Day on the 17th of September this year is going to be about medication safety. I think this is a real opportunity for us to pull together all the initiatives that we're actually putting in place for this, and also where the gaps are, what else we need to be doing. So the team are working very closely with what's been recommended by the WHO for this particular day, but putting our own CTM spin on that, so that we'll be able to give a much better idea of exactly where our issues are, but what we are doing to tackle about it. And I'd like to present that to the Quality and Safety Committee, and with their permission, then I will bring that to this board at a future date, if that's all right. But that's the only comments I was going to make. And if I haven't got any questions to answer at the end, I'll hand over to George to take on the next section.
Thank you, Dom. Thank you, Chair. So just touching very quickly on complaints on page 230 of the pack, page 11 of this report. Just wanted to highlight the fact that the number of complaints you'll see is going down, but that's the formal complaints, and that is a direct result of the fact that we are putting a lot of effort into dealing with complaints at early resolution, which is exactly where we want to see the trend going. So that's really, really encouraging. And you'll also see the dip that I referred to at the last board meeting in May in our response rate to formal concerns is picking back up. So that, as you will recall, was a direct result of redeployment of clinical staff onto the COVID vaccination programme. They're back in post now, and they're working through all of the formal complaint responses. So our performance is improving. Still not where we'd like it to be, but it's improving. So that's really an encouraging sign. And again, obviously, I'll join Greg and Dom to answer any questions on the policy report. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I invite board members to raise any questions. Wendy, can you please confirm if there are any questions or objections raised, please?
None, Chair.
Thank you. Then I invite board members. Excuse me. I invite board members to note this report. I then go on to item 7.1.3, please, which is the operational delivery performance. I invite Gethin Hughes to present the update just before the board for noting. Gethin.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to address anything further around planned care or elective emergency care, having covered those in the presentation and in some of the previous conversations. What I was just going to mention to board was cancer performance, and so members will be aware that we have an improvement trajectory in place for cancer to move towards a 73% delivery of the single cancer pathway by the end of this financial year. As members are aware from previous briefings and discussions at PPF, what we are first focused on is reducing our very longest waiters, so reducing the volume of patients who are waiting over 104 days and over 62 days. And so what we will what we're doing is very targeted interventions across those tumour sites to bring those numbers down, and running alongside that are changes to the so implementing optimal pathways across a number of tumour sites. So it was just to flag that performance will remain low whilst we treat or diagnose and treat any patients with cancer in those longer waiting cohorts, but we'll see performance then improving towards the latter half of the year, but just to acknowledge that performance will remain in a poorer position until we've managed to work through that backlog. Happy to take any other questions on anything else.
Thank you, Gethin. I invite board members to raise any questions. So questions or comments? I suggest that unless there are any objections, the board resolves to note the report. And Wendy, can you please confirm if there are any remaining questions or any objections raised, please?
None, Chair.
Thank you, Wendy. If I could then go on to item 7.1.4 on workforce performance. I invite Michelle Hurley-Tyers on behalf of Howard Daniel to present the update which is before the board for noting. Due to the timing of the committee dates, scrutiny of this performance information will take place at the People and Culture Committee taking place on the 10th of August. So I encourage a focus on key issues for board awareness. Michelle.
Thank you, Emrys. Again, I'm noting that people have probably read the reports. I was only going to point out a few things, many of which have been mentioned earlier around workforce, in particular, balancing the constraints and the difficulties people have mentioned around trying to complete things like core learning and PADRs, and again some of the disappointment on the sickness rates. But again, we have things that we're working on those in the background. But again, happy to take any comments or questions. But as you said, this paper is going also to People and Culture for full scrutiny.
I invite board members to raise any questions or comments. I suggest that unless there are any objections, the board resolves to note this report, and thank you to Michelle for your contribution. Wendy, can you please confirm if there are any remaining questions or any objections raised, please?
None, Chair.
Thank you. I could then go on to item 7.1.5, financial performance. I invite Sally May to present the update, which is before the board for noting. Sally.
I will take the report as read, and it has been scrutinised in committee, but I just want to raise a couple of points. Board members are aware that we were unable to submit a balanced core plan, which was a breach of our financial duty. Our core deficit for the year is set at 26.5 million. As at month 3, we have an adverse variance against that of 1.2 million, but we're maintaining the forecast performance. Board members may also be aware that Judith Paget has written to Paul Mears setting out some accountability conditions in response to our annual plan, and that includes a number of finance requirements. And I just want to sort of draw out some of the issues around where we are against those. So the first action is to mitigate exceptional costs throughout the year. In terms of our exceptional costs at plan stage, we submitted at 19 million. At month 2, that had reduced to 18 million, but at month 3, we've increased to 21.8 million. That increase reflects estimates around the All Wales energy contracts, and that is the largest portion of the exceptional cost category. We will clearly try to work to reduce that wherever possible, but the market is extremely volatile. We have fixed in terms of Prince Charles Merthyr, which falls outside the All Wales energy contracts, and that will in part mitigate some of that increase, but it is a volatile position. We've also been asked to demonstrate action to mitigate COVID costs throughout the year. That was set at 32.3 million at plan stage. This is the COVID response costs. It reduced to 30.5 million forecast at month 2, but has risen again to 30.7 million at month 3. Things are obviously, the situation with COVID needs to be kept under careful consideration. We have assumptions within our plan position about costs dropping off later in the year, but that will be very much dependent on not seeing a significant rise in cases as we move forward. Then finally, we need to have been asked to reduce the risk to delivery in our savings plan and get increased confidence around savings delivery, which will be monitored by the FDU on a quarterly basis. At this point, I'm afraid that our forecast recurrent savings have reduced slightly at month 3 to 10.7 million against a target of 17.3, which is a 6.6 million gap. As a consequence, we have moved our underlying deficit as at the 31st of March 23 by the 6.6 million to 34.6, having previously been set at 28 million. This deterioration is around is entirely down to the shortfall in recurrent savings, and we will need to work very hard and have significant work to increase our savings delivery. Our value and effectiveness programme, which many of you are aware of, is developing a pipeline of savings opportunities, but the position is challenging and will need continued focus, including as we transition through the new operating model. Finally, just want to draw people's attention to the fact that at this point, whilst we were advised to assume that exceptional and COVID response costs would be fully funded by Welsh Government, that funding has not yet been confirmed, and we've been asked to show that as a risk to the plan. Should that funding not materialise, that will have a significant impact on where we are at the year end, and we will need to carefully think through our cash planning in relation to that as well. So I'm happy to take any questions, but those are the points I wanted to draw out from the report.
Thank you, Sally. I invite board members to raise any questions, and the first one's coming in from Patsy, please.
Thanks, Sally. Continue to see the development of this report and applaud the progress that you've made. It's much easier to read, and I think non-accountants amongst us would recognise the benefit of being able to understand the financial figures, so thank you for that. I do have a couple of questions. I'll give you all of my thoughts and then give you a chance to respond. Okay. Are all health boards in the same position with regards to removing the COVID losses from the position and therefore creating more of a deficit than was expected at this stage? My second question is around page 5 of the executive summary and the year-to-date position, and I see that the year-to-date deficit of 7.8 million is on a straight line basis. Surprises me that it's straight line, because where savings plans are developed, they generally deliver more in the latter part of the year, and I thought that was the difference between the in-house financial reporting and the Welsh Government reporting. And then just finally to say well done with PSPP. The graph looks spectacular, and I can see it only increases in increments, but in very small increments, but it's still an achievement given the amount of work that's going on within finance. Thanks.
Okay, shall I deal with the issue of what's included in the COVID response costs first? So at plan stage, it is clear that there was significant variation between health boards about the level of assumed income for COVID response, and actually Cwmtaf Morgannwg is at the lowest end of the scale. So we have been more moderated in terms of what we've put forward. Nevertheless, post-plan submission, there has been clarification around what can be included, and I think that's an ongoing process, and we have been told to move that. That has been common to other areas, but what's being moved and what people included had such a huge variation that it may have a differential impact. But it is interesting to note how much lower our assumed costs are at this stage than anyone else. So it's an ongoing process of clarification. I think one area that we also will need to look at is the guidance has been clarified around prescribing. for example, where it's supposedly to the costs that can be recovered are those for treating the symptoms of COVID, in which case our current estimate may be a little high and we need to bring that back down, which is another potential pressure. However, ours was certainly not the largest assumption around that, with at least one health board having an assumption around prescribing, which is around 10 million compared to our 2.1. So some significant variation. In terms of the savings plans, probably best if I, outside of the meeting, share some of the detail around that so you can see how it's working. In terms of our overall position, I think we're just comparing where we are compared with a straight line projection forward, which would allow us to get, which would say we've got an adverse position. We do need to do quite a lot of work around savings. The transition out of COVID hasn't been as smooth as we would like, and that re-engagement around savings plans. However, the value and effectiveness work, I think we've talked about for the next planning, performance and finance committee, having a sort of focus around that, which will hopefully give you some of those answers so you can track it through in more detail. And on PSPP, yes, that is an improvement. It's great. We have still got more to go. I mean, we need to re-engage people around how they're using Oracle on our whole P2P processes and getting that working more smoothly. We've got a programme of joint training that we're developing between procurement and financial systems to hopefully support budget holders to understand the importance of this and get the system working more effectively. So I'm sort of pleased to see progress, but I think there's still more work to be done.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Patsy. Thanks to Sally for her report. I suggest, unless there are any objections, the board resolves to note this report. Wendy, can you please confirm if there are any remaining questions or any objections raised, please?
There are none, Chair.
Thank you, Wendy. If I go on to item 7.2 then, it's on the CTM operating model and a progress report. I invite Paul Mears to present the report, which is before the board for noting, an update on the implementation of the Health Board's new operating model. Paul.
Thank you, Emrys. Just to give an update really on this topic, board members will know that we have begun the process of moving the operating model in the organisation from the ILG model that we currently have to the care group model, and we began a formal consultation on that back in May, which closed in the beginning of June, and we've been most recently in the past few weeks moving to the appointment process for the new leadership teams in the new care group structure. It's really important, I think, just to emphasise that whilst we might be moving away from the ILG model, we will still keep a very clear locality focused approach, particularly in the primary care and community services, where obviously it's a really important need to make sure that we are as close as possible to the local community, and particularly exploiting the opportunities that we discussed earlier for closer integration with health and social care with the local authorities. We had a large amount of feedback from staff and colleagues across the organisation, and as I said, the implementation processes began back on the in June, with the most recently, as I said, appointments being made to the leadership posts. We're hopeful that we should be able to confirm the most recent appointments out to the organisation in the next day or two, which I think will be really positive in terms of setting out who's going to be involved in the leadership of each area. And obviously, if there are any remaining gaps, we will be communicating out about how we propose to go about filling those. It's been a process that's been quite tightly managed against quite ambitious timescales, but it's all been done in line with the organisation's organisational change policy. And I have to say thank you to Richard and colleagues who have been overseeing the process, because I think given the timescales we worked to, it was a very ambitious time frame to work to, but we've been able to stick to that pretty much as planned. And I think, you know, there's never a good time to be doing an organisational restructure, but I think we felt that it was important to get this new model in place as quickly as we could do, particularly given some of the challenges we've talked about today around the pressures in unscheduled care, elective care, diagnostics and other areas. So that's all I really wanted to say, Emrys, that the information was there in the paper. I know there's been conversations also in board briefings and IM briefings about where we've got to, but just to say it's on track as we planned, and we'll obviously maintain and continue to update colleagues as the process develops.
Thank you, Paul. I invite board members to raise any questions. Patsy?
Yeah, just one question from me, and this is back to Sally really. On page 143 of the consultation document, it talks about budget transfers between different care groups, and it also suggests the new hierarchies will be in place by the 1st of August. That is a massive ask, isn't it? So my questions are, is that achievable, firstly, by the 1st of August? Is it reasonable to say there won't really be any increased costs or indeed decreased costs? Because as I understand it, when the health board moved to the ILG model, accepting this was before you joined, Sally, there was additional money put in for the management structure of the ILGs. So, but there wasn't a whole bottom-up budgeting process that was taking place. So are we compounding potential budgetary problems in moving things around almost at a very high level? Thanks.
So at this point, I think we're on track for delivering against that mapping. That's partly because what we've done is taken CSGs and map them into the new care groups. That might not be their final form in terms of how they're working, but we've taken a pragmatic approach. That's how it'll map through, and that makes the process of transition difficult, but simpler than it would have been if we went for a sort of wholesale bottom-up approach. So we are expecting to be able to report in a care group structure as at month 5, which will be, I think, helpful for us to make that whole transition speedy and able to track through. In terms of the overall cost of the structure, we've always said that what we were aiming for was something that was cost neutral or better. Some of those things still need to be worked through, and I'm expecting that overall that we do push down on the costs, and we do try to deliver a position that may take a little while to settle through. We will have, I think, some vacancies to start off with, which will give us some non-recurrent savings, but overall the aim is that has been the aim for our whole transition.
Paul, did you want to come in on that? No. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your report, Paul. And I suggest, as there are no objections, the board resolves to note the update. Thank you. If I could then move on to item 7.3, please. Our health, our future. I invite Linda Prosser to present the report, which includes a thematic report following community engagement, which is before the board for noting.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. So I've brought this paper to this meeting with a view to just bringing you up to date with the activities that are being undertaken, and 2 things in particular to consider on the way to the production of a strategy document, which we will bring back in September. I don't think it'll be a big document, but I think it will be comprehensively covering the areas that are listed here. So we will have various chapters. One will be about our role as an anchor institution in developing community resilience, and an element which is about the clinical services both in hospital and out of hospital. There's a green element and a workforce and digital elements to it. Now, in terms of the green, you can see there that we have submitted a decarbonisation strategy to Welsh Government. That has been approved since the submission of these papers. So there are aspects in there that we're working on, which are about how we deliver our services, as well as how we develop our buildings and fleet according to affordability. But in developing the former chapters around how we support communities, how we design our services, there's been, as we've heard several times, a massive undertaking of engagement, both internal and external, and the appendix is a full report on the findings to date, and we bring that partly to illustrate what we're responding to as we develop our ideas and what you will see, but also although it's not quite finished, we are at a point with the engagement where the messages that we're getting are now so consistent that we feel confident that this report is comprehensive in terms of what people are telling us matters to them. The only comment I would make about it is that within the appendix there's a thematic map which perhaps, and CHC felt, I've tested it with them, felt perhaps didn't emphasise enough some of the mental health areas that people are talking about. It is in the rest of the document, but we might just make a tweak there to make that really clear. So we, as I say, we will come back. This is a stepping stone. We'll come back in September with some documents that will help you see how we think we're going to respond to these challenges.
Thank you, Linda. I invite board members to raise any questions. Thanks to Linda for her report. I suggest that unless there are any objections, the board resolves to note this report. Wendy, can you please confirm there are any remaining questions or objections raised, please?
There are none, Chair.
Thank you, Wendy. If I could then go on to item 7.4, which is the annual plan for 2022-2023 quarter one update. I invite Linda Prosser to present the report, which details progress against the plan we approved in May earlier this year and is before the board for noting. Linda.
Thank you. And again, since the submission of these papers, this plan has been accepted by Welsh Government, and we have been given some conditions for which to against which to monitor ourselves and to account to Welsh Government in its delivery. So what we've done here is pull out the half a dozen areas, specific areas where there were activities that we needed to be delivering. I mean, there are, as you can tell, some of these are about, that strategic development, which we've just talked about. Some are about performance measures that we've already talked about as well. And I think we're relatively confident about delivering on the special projects. But as we've heard at length, if we're challenged, it's around our performance and finance. But we've covered that in this meeting. So the one thing I would highlight there as a special project is the weight management programme that we've invested in. In fact, it was the only discretionary investment that we felt able to make given the financial situation, but obviously it's a high priority, and you'll see that we are in the process of setting up that service, which is part of our requirements. So the rest of it, I think, is just an update on the extent to which we are responding and an indication of where the evidence is around that to date. So we'll do this quarterly. We'll just make sure that the board are on top of any issues that relate to the delivery of the annual plan.
Thank you, Linda. I invite board members to raise any questions. Wendy, can you please confirm if there are any questions?
Sorry, can I just jump in there? Yeah, just to also say, just to sort of add to what Linda said, we this couple of days ago had our regular JET meeting, joint executive meeting with Welsh Government, and we'll obviously provide an update formally in the board through the board next time. But it was, I think, given a lot of the challenges that we've just described throughout the meeting this morning and this afternoon, I think there was a great deal of support from Welsh Government for what we were doing and how we are focusing on the right areas to improve. But as Linda just described, also a challenge of how are we going to get into a position as an organisation where we can move to having a IMTP that is balanced and agreed. I think we need to be really realistic about the challenges that, some of which Sally's described in her financial report. You know, that is not going to be an easy ask, and I think, you know, we need to be quite realistic. So it's probably, again, something we need to be thinking about as we move into the sort of in the autumn, into the second half of the financial year, about what we're going to be looking to, where we're going to be looking to get to in next year. And I know it sounds early to be talking about next year, but I think we need to be starting those conversations probably in September time about what we'll be looking at into next year, because I think there will be some real pressures in the second half of this financial year financially, but also moving into next financial year, that are going to be quite challenging when we're balancing against all the expectations of performance improvement, quality improvement, and the strategic work we're trying to do. So I think probably in September we need to have perhaps some time to think about where we as a board are starting to get to in terms of thoughts for next year.
Thank you very much, Paul. Can I just ask members again if there are any questions or comments that anyone would like to raise with either Paul or Linda in respect to what you've just heard? No? Okay. Thanks to Linda for your report. I suggest that unless there are any objections, the board resolves to note this report. Wendy, just for confirmation, can you confirm there are any remaining questions or any objections raised, please?
There are none, Chair.
Thank you. I'm now going to go back to item 2.1, which we had some technical difficulties earlier in respect of the patient story. So if I could invite Greg Dixon, our nursing director, to introduce the story, please.
Of course, thank you, Chair. Excuse me. So this story relates to one of our local women who gave birth in Tyrian midwifery-led unit, and which is on in the grounds of the RGH site. So the story, I'm sure, will enlighten colleagues across the board in relation to the work we've been leading on maternity improvements over the last few years. So thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bryony. I'm the consultant midwife for midwife-led care at Cwmtaf Morgannwg Health Board. We're here with Alex today to cover her story. I first met Alex quite early on in her pregnancy, where I received a referral regarding some anxiety that Alex had around her upcoming birth. She'd seen about using our midwife-led settings and wasn't sure whether that was something that would be possible for her given her individual circumstances. So we first worked on unpicking some of the reasons that she'd found her last birth quite difficult and quite traumatic. And then we moved on to thinking about supporting her with some individualised birth planning. So in respect of Alex, the recommendation would be that her baby, based on her church and her beliefs and the risk that she may be exposed to in pregnancy due to bleeding, would be that birth took place in a hospital environment. And given Alex's previous experiences, that wasn't something that she felt particularly comfortable to do. So we explored and planned together. That the multidisciplinary team, so both obstetric and anaesthetic input, to, like I said, to come up with an individualised birth plan which met Alex's needs. Ultimately, the discussions that we had lead into her feeling that she's making a fully informed decision to go ahead with a birth at Tyrian Birth Centre, understanding the care that we can provide in that setting and what that means in her situation, and understanding ultimately the care that we're not able to provide.
Hi everyone, my name's Alex. I'm 29 and this is my little boy Otis. He was born in February. I've got an older son as well, who's almost 3. And I'm just here to talk about my birth story. So I was consultant-led care in the Princess of Wales Hospital. That is not because I'm high risk, but just because I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So that means that I don't accept blood transfusions. So this put me into consultant-led care. I was in contact with Bryony because I had had a really difficult experience with my first birth with Isaac. And so Bryony got in touch with me to try and see how she could make my birth better this time around. And part of that involved me discussing with him the prospect of giving birth at Tyrian, because I really wanted a different experience this time and a much more calm experience where I had more choices. When we came in, everything was calm, everybody was friendly. We were immediately put into our own private room and given, you know, the birthing ball to bounce on. And a midwife came in straight away, spoke to me and my husband, asked us if I wanted to be examined. And then from there on, they got my care on the way straight away. They gave me gas and air when I asked for it. And then once I had explained that I would really like to be in the pool, they told me that unfortunately the pool had already had a lady in it. So I said that was okay, I would manage without. And then fortunately, Bryony came in then. She just happened to be working at the time when I was going into labour, and she said to me that she would try and get me the other pool open because there was enough staff on. So she managed to get that second pool filled up, and then I got to have Otis in the pool, which was amazing. Everything was so calm. I got to I felt like I was in control the whole time, and I got to have a say in everything. They would always ask me, do you want us to do this? Do you want us to do that? Is it okay if we do this? So I knew what was happening the whole way through. I felt like the midwives were all on my side, which sounds like a given, but I didn't feel like that the first time around. I felt like they were all wanting me to have a good experience. And it was just overall really positive. Like even now, when I drive down the road that I drove to go to Tyrian, I still think about, this was the time that I was giving birth, and I feel really happy about it. I have a really positive memory when I think about my birth. So a friend of mine mentioned it to me because I said I was dreading giving birth this time around, and that I had really wanted a home birth, but I was also a little bit scared of that and not quite sure if it was for me. And she said, oh, well, have you heard about birthing centres? And I hadn't, so I said, oh no, I don't really know what that is. And she said that she'd seen on Facebook about Tyrian, and I don't use Facebook, so she had to show me what it was, and she sent me some pictures of it and sent me a link, and I thought that was exactly what I wanted. It looked like a hotel for birth. It looked really cool. And it did feel like that when we were there. It felt like the kind of thing you would pay for. I was so surprised that this was something that you could get on the NHS. I really thought this felt like a private hospital experience. So that's how I heard about Tyrian, and as soon as I heard about it, I thought, I wonder if I'll be able to do this because I'm consultant led. So then Bryony really helped me to see the ways in which I could make that choice if I wanted to. She was extremely important because I wouldn't have made that decision without Bryony, I don't think. But it wasn't as if she forced me into making that decision. I think she just helped me to see that that was an option for me, because we, as Jehovah's Witnesses, we have like a hospital liaison committee, and they are really involved in our care and help us to make sure that we don't need to have blood transfusions or anything like that. They help us a lot, and with that, they normally recommend that the safest option is hospital birth, which is completely understandable because that is the safest option for most people, because if something goes wrong, you're in the right place for it. But Bryony was sort of explaining to me that just because of my religious beliefs, they were showing me that my first birth, I didn't really bleed my first birth. I had a normal birth the first time around, and that means that she was sort of showing me statistics in the birthplace study, and that I'm more likely to have a good outcome this time around. And then she was also explaining the risks and what would happen if anything did go wrong with ambulance transfers and things like that. So I felt like I had all the information from Bryony, which enabled me to make that decision that I wanted to go with the birth centre. Having experienced both the hospital birth and a birth centre birth, I would say that they were completely worlds apart. I really felt like the birth centre was an amazing experience, and I felt like being calm meant that my birth went smoother, and having that nice environment where you feel comfortable and where you feel at home, and you feel like you're respected. I think that made such a big difference to my experience overall, that I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it to anybody.
So just from a wider perspective, this is something obviously that we offer for all women across Cwmtaf Morgannwg Health Board, and we are certainly working really hard to make sure that all women are empowered to make informed decisions that are right for them. So whilst we know that we've got, we're always applying evidence-based practice and, individual kind of nice guidelines, other guidelines, we also know that sometimes women need support in respect of planning something that's different and maybe sits outside that, but we respect their fundamental rights to make that choice.
Thank you for that very informed patient story, where we can see how Alex as a mum, the experience she's had, and speaking so positively about her experience in the Tyrian Birth Centre. And also big thank you to Bryony, the consultant midwife, in taking the lead in presenting this video for us for our board. So if I could now ask if any colleagues would like to, I invite colleagues in to make any comments. Firstly, can I invite in Greg, please? Greg.
Thanks very much, Chair. I think this really demonstrates the value of the role of the consultant midwife across the health board, and the multi-professional individual risk assessments that take place on a daily basis to support women's choice. We deliver around 350 babies a month across our sites, and between 6 and 9 sets of twins. So again, the opportunity for women to have one-on-one support, certainly those women that are on a low risk pathway or would like to be on a low risk pathway, and then following those women from normally the 10-week booking, and then on some occasions delivering the baby, I think is a really great experience for women, certainly across the Tyrian footprint, but equally Tyrian is available for women across the whole of our patch. So I just like, it's a shame Bryony had to go back to her clinical duties today. I know she would have been really proud to have seen that video being shown at the board, and certainly I'll go back to her to let her know that we did overcome the IT problems. But big thanks to Bryony and the Tyrian team for all of the support they do for our local women.
Thank you very much, Greg. Are there any further comments or questions, please? Wendy, can you confirm, please?
There are none, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. I'm so glad that we managed to hear the patient story at the end of our meeting, and my apologies for the technical difficulties that we had at the beginning of the meeting when we tried to get the film to be shown at board earlier on in the agenda. But you can see about the positive work that's been undertaken there, and it's really good to hear Alex as a mum of her positive experience within our Tyrian Birth Centre. And as I said, I'm really pleased that we've managed to get to hear it on our agenda, albeit at the end of our agenda. Can I now move on to item 8, please, which is any other business? I've not been notified of any other business items. Wendy, can you please confirm if anyone has raised any issues under any other business, please?
None today, Chair.
Okay, thank you. To item 9, and how do we do in this meeting? I refer board colleagues to the comments regarding this item made during introductory remarks at the beginning of the meeting, which I asked you to bear in mind. I therefore invite board colleagues to put forward any comments for improvement at this point or within 2 weeks of this meeting. Wendy, can you confirm if we've had any comments, please?
None received, thanks, Chair.
Just one comment from me. I'd say that obviously we've had a few technical issues with the IT today. And I know when I spoke with both the Chief Executive, our Chief Executive colleague Paul, and our Board Secretary Georgina, is that it's time now, I think, to move forward to a face-to-face meetings. I think it's one of the learnings from the day, and I think that we're probably in a better position to do face-to-face meetings. And I would suggest that our next board meeting will be a face-to-face meeting. That doesn't mean to say that we won't have a camera at the meeting, or there'll be opportunities for people to dial into the meeting. I'm just saying that's going to be, for me, that's going to be our next stage in board meetings. Okay, if I could then go on to item 10, which is the date and time of the next meeting. We will be holding our annual general meeting this afternoon, again in virtual format. We'll be playing a video which seeks to provide a snapshot of the year 2021-2022, together with some information regarding our plans for 2022 and beyond. We will also be publishing a shortened version of the video via our social media accounts. Should anyone wish to access a copy of the CTM UHB annual report, this will be published following the AGM on our website, both in English and Welsh. Links to the meeting are available on our website for anyone who wishes to join the meeting. We look forward to seeing you there. The next scheduled meeting of the board held in public will take place on Thursday, the 29th of September, commencing at 10 o'clock. Rydym ni'n dod â cyfarfod o'r Bwrdd Iechyd I Ben a hoffwn I ddiolch I bawb sydd wedi ymuno a ni a gwylio cyfarfod heddiw. I now bring the board meeting to a close and would like to extend thanks to all who participated in the meeting and who observed proceedings today. Thank you.